This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Can I welcome everyone to the Police and Crime Committee meeting? This morning we will be holding our monthly question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime and the Metropolitan Police Service. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions. Can I ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from the Deputy Chair, Assembly Member Roberts and Assembly Member Ahmad.
Thank you, Lauren. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? No. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of July to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can we note the ongoing and closed actions arising from previous meetings of the committee?
Noted.
Thank you. Can we note the response received from the Mayor to the committee's report, Police Investigation of Serious Injury Collisions? Thank you. Before I welcome the guests, I wanted to mention that as part of our investigation into public order policing, the committee has launched a public survey where we want to hear directly from Londoners on the issue of public order policing. The survey can be found on our social media channels at London Assembly or on our website. So we'll now move to our question and answer session. I'd like to welcome Sophie Linden, Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, and Matt Twist, Assistant Commissioner for the Metropolitan Police, MPS. Good morning, both of you. So I'm going to start the questioning, and we're starting off with Notting Hill Carnival. So if I ask you both, if I come to you first, Matt Twist, what are your reflections on the policing of this year's Notting Hill Carnival?
Well, good morning, Chair, and good morning, panel, and thank you for inviting me. So reflections on Notting Hill. I think the Carnival is one of London's greatest and most culturally significant events, which rightly draws visitors from across the world, actually, to see it. It's an incredibly challenging event to police, and it's fair to say that some welcome changes have taken place in recent years, including some extra investment from City Hall, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and the Westminster City Council. But we still see significant violence, crime, and crowd safety challenges. We also this year, very sadly and tragically, saw the deaths of Musi Imnetu and Sher Maximin in the days following Carnival. And I'm sure all of our thoughts are with their loved ones whilst these investigations are ongoing. I think it's very important that, we don't sort of overlook some of the challenges that we face. So in terms of reflections, I can give you some sort of key statistics which I think sort of paint the picture as to what we're dealing with. And I'll start that by saying that the overwhelming vast majority of people in their hundreds of thousands come to Carnival and have a brilliant day and enjoy it. There are numbers of the small hundreds who come to Carnival intent on committing crime, and that is usually serious crime. So over the 3 days, officers made 353 arrests. 72 of those were for offensive weapons, 13 were for sexual assaults, 1 was for a firearms offence, 33 violence, and 53 at the time assaults on emergency workers. We had, as I mentioned, 2 murders, 8 stabbings linked to those attending the event, and in total 889 crimes were reported, split between 316 on the Sunday and 547 on the Monday. In total, 65 officers were assaulted, and whilst that's unacceptable, I'm pleased to say that they were at the lower end of seriousness, so we didn't have any serious injuries to officers during the carnival itself. In terms of the demand, across the weekend, over 14,000 officer shifts were used. We changed our model this year, so 7,000 of those shifts were undertaken by officers that are not usually based on boroughs. So we managed to spread the demand across the whole Met rather than just using neighbourhood or response team officers. And we had officers from across the whole of the force working on the carnival. Across the weekend, we also tracked 80 unlicensed music events, 79 of which we managed to prevent in advance, 1 of which we dealt with soon after it was set up. And then probably the most concerning element, the thing that I'm always most worried about with Carnival, is crowd density. So over the course of Notting Hill Carnival weekend, we had 100 spontaneous crowd incidents which were monitored through the joint cell. And in addition to the frequent monitoring of 9 key locations that we know are challenging and reporting across all 5 of the Met sectors, we did have to step in a number of times in order to sort of reduce the crowd density in order to save life. So I think whilst we acknowledge the sort of the crime often gets the headlines, actually the thing that worries me most is the crowd density and the potential for a mass casualty event. And I'll pause there.
Yeah, are you concerned? I mean, I've seen aerial pictures or pictures taken from windows where police, so I'm just talking about your officers now, no. Are you concerned? I've seen them absolutely rammed like sardines into the middle of a crowd. So even if they saw somebody doing something or with a knife, they can't move. Does that, I mean, if it was my staff, I would be worried sick about putting them into a situation like that. Are you?
So I've policed Notting Hill Carnival on and off, not every year, but since 1997. And have done it in a number of roles, both as a sort of constable, sergeant, inspector, commander on the ground, and latterly overseeing it as a senior officer. And of course, I am worried about officer injuries. I'm worried about officer assaults. I think the biggest fear that officers have actually isn't in that crowd. It's not about them as much as being unable to get the 10 metres from me to you in the event that they saw something serious happening. You do have situations where at times crime is being committed, but you cannot get there. And certainly, later on the Monday this year, towards the top of Ladbroke Grove, we had instances where officers literally couldn't move due to the sort of level of crowding that we saw. I think it is really important, and I think the committee, I'm glad that the crowd issue is raised, because we definitely see this as the biggest risk. There is a partnership meeting that's going to take place in the next sort of short number of days to look at this and explore some of the ways that we might be able to make Notting Hill Carnival safer. But it's very important also to note that the police are not responsible for crowd safety or crowd management.
No.
That is the organiser. And one of the core things that we need to, working in partnership, one of the most important things we need to do is to have absolute clarity over who is responsible for different elements of it. Very clearly, the police are responsible for prevention and detection of crime, for keeping the King's peace, and if necessary, for saving life. But this year started, as previous years have started, with my Gold Commander writing in their log that we are having to deploy officers from the very start in order to backfill areas where the organiser has been unable to provide sufficient stewarding or crowd control. And so the core responsibility of policing that is engaged in those circumstances is that to save life. So we start the event from a premise of needing to step in to save life, to resource areas that the organisers have been unable to. I think there have been, and again, it's really important to note that there has been progress on this, and things we are moving, albeit I think the number of people coming to Carnival is moving faster than the progress that we are making. And this year, the crowd monitoring cell, which is a joint thing that started last year, which was really effective, we did that again, and utilises shared images from CCTV, police helicopters, police liaison teams and partners to try and help manage this. But again, police is really important. Policing doesn't own the risk here, but we do what we can to try and mitigate it as best we can when we need to.
Okay. A colleague of yours said, and I'm quoting, "We are tired of saying the same words every year. We are tired of telling families that their loved ones are seriously injured or worse. We are tired of seeing crime scenes at Carnival." Do you agree with him?
So that was Adi Adelican, who's my goal commander, who said those words.
Yeah.
Yes, of course we are. I mean, it's absolutely tragic, isn't it, that so many people can go to such a brilliant event, and I thoroughly enjoy so many parts of it, going around and seeing the amazing floats and the dancing and other things during the day. It is very clear that as you get later into the day, particularly on Monday, the situation becomes much more challenging from a policing perspective. There is higher crime, and that very small minority of people who attend intent on committing crime, intent on using Notting Hill as a vehicle to deal with gang disputes or other things. It's very clear that that happens on Monday night, and I think DAC Adelican is absolutely right to draw attention to those things because... and the crime statistics that we've seen bear that out.
Yes, absolutely. And I couldn't agree with him more either. Sophie, do you want to comment on Notting Hill?
Thanks a lot. I think Matt has quite clearly set out some of the challenges of Notting Hill, but also actually why Notting Hill is such a fantastic event. I think it's, the largest carnival in Europe and probably the second largest in the world, I understand. And the numbers have really been rising. Your first question was about the policing of Carnival. And it is, as Matt has already set out, it is a significant policing operation over the course of the weekend. When you've got 1 million people attending on both days, that's a huge policing operation. I think the Metropolitan Police do a very, very good job in that policing operation, not just in terms of preventing crime. And there has been, we've already set out the terrible murders that took place, but also the assaults and the stabbings that took place. But I think the Met do a very good job at preventing and then detecting those crimes, but in particular does an extremely good job in making sure that where as far as possible the crowd management is as safe as it can be. Carnival has changed over the few years. There has been, as Matt has said, there have been some changes put in place following on from some of the reports and the analysis from the crowd dynamics survey that MOPAC and the partnership commissioned in 2017. But it's, as Matt said, as usual, there will be a partnership meeting looking at what happened during Carnival, lessons learned and a debrief, and then what needs to happen in the future to continue to try to make Carnival as safe as possible. But come back to the fact that, I've spoken to people that attend Carnival year after year. It's a fantastic event. The Sunday and the Monday are both fantastic events. What we've got to make sure as a partnership, and it is a partnership event, is that it is as safe as possible.
Okay, so we've got people coming in from all over the world, and lots of them will see the crime that is there. I agree. I think the police do the very best job that they could in those circumstances. But Assistant Commissioner, given that so many people go, given that it's getting more and more every year, and given that you can see you're putting your officers into a situation where there are always some that are injured, and worse can happen. Do you feel that it could be something that the organisers should look at to move the carnival? And I know I have been really harangued for saying this because it doesn't go down well, but equally we've had people murdered this year. We have police that cannot go to crime when they see it because they cannot move. They're in like sardines. Surely it would be much safer put in a more controlled area where you can still have the floats, you can still have all the food stalls and all the other things that make it nice, but actually manage to control the danger aspect, which is absolutely there.
So thanks, Susan. It's a question that's cropped up before, and I think the most important thing to note is that it's not for the Met to have a role in the design of the event. And we also recognise that that isn't the first time I've heard that sort of idea mentioned, and it has been a matter of public debate, and I think there have been some articles written by retired officers recently in different newspapers on this point. There are also many Londoners who feel passionately that the carnival needs to remain in the sort of community from which it sprung all those years ago, and the sort of connection with that location is very, very important. I mean, our priority is to ensure that the carnival is safe, that the roles and responsibilities are clear, and that we're talking with all partners to highlight the challenges we see every year, and working as a partnership to play our role in line with our statutory responsibilities. So the location is one question, but there are many other questions and many other things that could be done in order to increase safety or not. So I don't want to get drawn on one thing. But what I am clear on, I think, is that at the moment I cannot say it's safe. And I think everybody agrees that the level of serious crime is too high. So we need to work with the organisers and all of those with statutory and partnership responsibilities to consider what more collectively we can do to increase the safety for those hundreds of thousands of people that are coming to have a fantastic day.
Okay, Sophie, given that we both agree the police did a fantastic job with this situation that they're in, it's clear it's not safe. What are your views on trying to persuade the community to move it for their safety and for everybody else's safety?
I think what needs to happen, and what is going to happen, and it will happen shortly, is a proper debrief of what happened at Carnival, where the pinch points were and where the most dangerous points were in terms of crowd safety, but also what happened at Carnival in terms of the violence and the murders. And then there needs to be, looking at what steps can be taken for the future to make it safer. We are not operationally in control of Carnival. I don't think we should second guess what would make Carnival safer, and to just, to reach for what might look like an easy lever or a possible lever. We should make sure that what we need to make sure happens is that debrief and that review of Carnival to look at where are the main points of danger and what can happen.
Okay, I hear what you say, but we both know that the police know full well where the pinch points were. I've been to enough briefings. I'll go over to Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Deputy Mayor, Assistant Commissioner. Didn't get your title right. Assistant Commissioner. I get a sense of déjà vu here. I came to this Assembly in 2016, and one of the very first things we did on this police committee was publish a report in January 2017, Notting Hill Carnival, Safer and Better. And some of the issues, well, in fact, many of the issues we just talked about in the last few minutes, we talked about in this report. So first, let me give my own personal observations. As a member of this police committee, I've attended every single carnival to observe the policing operation every year, including this year. And can I say that there's two aspects to Carnival. There's the policing of Carnival and the management of Carnival. The policing is absolutely great. Policing operation, the center, the policing command and control center, I marvel at it. That's the Met at its best. The policing on the ground, I can just say very well done. Is the management of Carnival that leaves a lot to be desired. So a lot of my questions could be directed to you, Deputy Mayor, in terms of the organizers and our relationship with them. But my own personal observations were this: lack of stewards. In fact, this year I understand, well, I was told, not understand, by one of the commanding officers on the ground. I think there were 4 bases. I visited one of the bases, that there were less stewards this year than in previous years. And in fact, in 2016-17, we talked about the need to actually increase the number of stewards. Small things maybe, but it just contributes to the sort of to the overall climate. Lack of sort of bins, so fly tipping, lack of toilets. Again, comes down to organization, public toilets. I walked around the footprint on my own, as I do every year, to make my own sort of observations. And no wonder people want to profit. And there were private toilets, people being charged £5, £3, just to sort of to relieve themselves. And overcrowding. The danger of being crushed against barriers or against walls, something which Commander Musker warned us in stark terms about 4 or 5 years ago, that we were that close 1 year to some fatalities occurring as a result of people being crushed against walls and then safety barriers. And those issues still remain. Before I ask my questions, I also need to draw my own conclusions. The title of our report was Notting Hill Carnival, Safer and Better. At best, debatable. At worst, no. So, in terms of questions, Assistant Commissioner, where are we with the 2 murder investigations? I think these were the first murders over the last decade. There have been stabbings before.
Well,
and one of the murders, I think, took place just outside the footprint, am I right? Although,
that's correct,
you know, that's neither here nor there.
So firstly, I mean, thank you for the kind words about policing, and as you will have seen, we go to great lengths every year to have an extensive observer programme, so both senior stakeholders, elected representatives and members of the community can come and see exactly what we're doing and what we're trying to do, and in some ways see how challenging it can be. If I just address a couple of points of detail, the point on less stewards than this year, that's in fact right, but it's a small number. So the reason for that is last year additional funding was provided for some extra stewards, which I agree with you are nowhere near enough to actually manage the size of crowd and to sort of deliver an effective crowd management plan for something that large. But the amount of money remained flat this year, so it was the same as last year, and with inflation and increases in the sort of minimum wage and such like, that meant that fewer stewards could be employed with the same money. So it was about 70 less this year than last year. So the numbers weren't huge, but it's worth sort of noting that actually, you know, stewarding costs money, and the organisers need to have resources in order to employ the number of stewards. Earlier on this year, sort of in the, you know, probably February sort of time, I wrote to the organiser asking them to ensure that there are a number of areas where police officers are posted into what I would describe as entirely stewarding roles, and that's an inappropriate use of police resources. So, and so that number totalled about 1,200, and I identified those locations and asked if those officers that are currently in the plan could be replaced by stewards who would be better able to perform the role of managing crowd safety as part of the event organiser's plan. But that wasn't possible. So as we got closer to the event, again, we needed to use those officers in that way to perform that sort of what is essentially a stewarding role. I think there's a couple of dynamics here that are also important, in that we don't want to give a sense that Carnival is over-policed. And it really shouldn't be. And if we were able to use officers to deal with their court responsibilities linked to crime, disorder, keeping the king's peace and saving life, rather than others' court responsibilities linked to crowd safety or first aid or wayfinding, then we may have a better chance of reducing crime. But at the moment, officers are having to deal with or are drawn into other people's areas of responsibility. In terms of the 2 murders, awful, you know, the most awful thing, isn't it? And everybody's thoughts remain with the families of those 2 that have been killed. The investigations are ongoing and are progressing at pace. We were able to very quickly identify suspects for one of the murders on the day or sort of immediately afterwards, and arrests have been made, as you'll know, and sort of charges have been brought. I can give you an update on the second one out of this committee, but I don't have the update to hand now on the second one where we are.
I think before I come to the Deputy Mayor, just to make the point about stewarding, it's not just the number of stewards, it's the quality of stewarding. So I was given an example by one of the commanders of the ground, where a group of 30 stewards had to actually leave the location they were sighted because they're simply not capable of dealing with any possible disorder. And as he said to me, that at the end of the day, we got no choice but to step into wider areas beyond our responsibilities to prevent any potential disorder.
So I think that what the commander describes is right, in that we have seen occasions previously, haven't gone through every sort of site this year, where stewards have sort of either abandoned their post or haven't been able to cope with the crowds as they are. And at that point, the policing core responsibility to save life kicks in. So that's why we end up with officers deploying to deal in stewarding roles, because absent that deployment, you would risk a dangerous crush or a dangerous sort of level of crowd density. And we saw that. I mean, I've showed a number of people. You mentioned sort of from 2016-17, but even last year we had an incident where members of the public were being hoisted up onto scaffolding at the side of the road to get out of the sort of what was a really dangerous level of crowd density. And we were very lucky that people weren't seriously injured last year. This year, again, at the top of Ladbroke Grove, at times I was deeply worried about the level of crowd density and the fact that people couldn't move and officers couldn't move. And these things happen at moments in time during Carnival, and it's very hard when you're dealing with sort of floats, when you're moving the floats around, that footprint. It's whilst we can predict in the main where the challenges will come, and we know there'll be challenges at the top of Ladbroke Grove, around where the Iron Bridge, around under the Westway, because these are sort of pinch points where floats often end up moving more slowly. Actually, significant challenge can occur anywhere. Depending on the dynamics of the crowd, depending on the float, depending on how many people are there, depending on the flow of people, which is why having an effective event and crowd management plan is so important. And I think we all agree, I think, that we want to help the organiser get to a place where they have a more effective event and crowd management plan.
Thank you. Turning to your Deputy Mayor, so what has MOPAC done since 2017 in terms of implementing our recommendations? I have to say that we made 2 recommendations, and there was a holding response, as I understand it, from the then Chief Executive. But since then, and I may be wrong, if I'm wrong, I do apologize, we've not heard anything. And as you said in our report, keeping the state, let me just say, the status quo is not an option. These issues still remain. So what has MOPAC done since our report came out in terms of addressing our findings and very specifically our 2 recommendations?
So there's been a lot of work since 2016, and I remember very well alongside you in the discussions that were had after the Carnival in 2016 because of the crowd safety issues that the then Commissioner flagged, and very rightly flagged and raised as serious concerns. There was your report, but also we had commissioned, MOPAC had worked, well actually we weren't the commissioners, MOPAC had worked with a strategic partnership group to commission the crowd dynamics report, which came out 2016-2017. Most of those recommendations were actually implemented around moving some of the what are they called? Music, the venue, the licensed venues, and moving some of those to different areas to try to deal with the crowd. Since 2016, every year, and this is what has happened, every year the Strategic Partnership Group meets regularly, immediately after Notting Hill Carnival to debrief, but then regularly in terms of looking at how is Carnival going to operate in for the following year. To be really clear, Notting Hill Carnival Limited is responsible for the official. They're the official event organisers. They're responsible for the event itself. They are supported and we work with them through the GLA events team, and also with Westminster Council and, as we know, Kensington and Chelsea Council as well. That strategic partnership group has met regularly. It's chaired by the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. I've already given you the membership of it. And then there is a GLA funders group chaired by the Mayor's Chief of Staff, David Bellamy, that looks at the funding of the event. The Mayor has increased the funding to Notting Hill Carnival Limited and maintained it for last year as well at £946,000 for stewarding an event.
How much?
£946,000 for event and stewarding. But the Assistant Commissioner is right. This isn't just about stewarding. It is about event management, and there to be a very good professional event management team and the support and the work that we've got to do this year is to ensure that the important steps that have been taken, because I don't think this is completely deja vu or everything's just the status quo, it's all been the same since 2016. There have been changes made, but there still need to be changes made to make sure that Carnival is safer, especially given the fact that the crowds have increased and increased every year. We've seen that, you know, a significant increase in the numbers attending Carnival. So we need to make sure that the event management is able to reflect that and to be able to understand what that means to safety.
Okay, so you answered my other two questions. One is of partnership working, and also about how to improve what monies you give in terms of improving stewarding. Because, yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we found in 2016-17, and the organizers are not here to defend themselves, but from memory, we actually they were good people, but we commented on what we felt was the lack of professionalism and the need to commercialize and exploit the full potential of Carnival, which in turn generates more money to pay for more and better stewarding. That is simply not happening. It's not the sole responsibility of MOPAC, except that issues of toilets and bins, I would have thought is the organizing committee with the local councils. So everyone has got a role to play. But there are clearly many issues. Chair, I'm not going to take up too much more time because we've got many other issues to explore. But I will just say, can we please revisit our recommendations? There's only two, but they still remain very valid today in 2024. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Garbutt.
Thank you for your responses so far. It was really good to hear that more can be done to improve the safety in the current kind of historic location of Notting Hill Carnival. I also joined the police on the Monday of Carnival with my colleague Caroline Russell. And to follow on the theme that we've just been discussing, Assistant Commissioner, you mentioned that 1,200 roles were identified as could not be, police doing roles that maybe police shouldn't be doing and could focus on other things. Were any of those to do with the entry into the site?
Thanks, Zoe. I think there are a number of roles ranging from sort of providing security at St John's ambulance tents to being able to implement cordons and filter cordons to slow the management of crowd, which would be very clearly within the sort of responsibilities of the crowd management plan and the event organiser. The 1,200 sort of roles, they were the ones that I would put, and sort of working with DAC Adelican, who's was the gold commander this year, has done it a number of years. Prior to that was the silver commander, and in fact has worked every Notting Hill Carnival, I think, for the last 29 years. His assessment that these were just by far the easiest roles. They weren't the total. If we were being purist about our core responsibilities, there are many more roles we wouldn't be doing. These were the absolute easiest things that we could have asked the organiser to do, because it was simply things like, we need to replace 6 officers at the end of this road who are providing a sort of security to a first aid tent. We need to implement an ability to put in a filter cordon to slow the movement of crowds to prevent a sort of crowd density challenge further along the route. I think one of the other things that struck me this year, and I spent both days on the footprint all day, many hours there, and then went to the sort of specialist ops room late in the evening, was just the number of times officers were dealing with people who were sort of unwell. They weren't injured, they were unwell as a result of intoxication and sort of were incapable of looking after themselves. And there's something that we definitely need to look at, because every time officers were dealing with people who were unwell, that was taking up time on the radio channels, that was taking up their time trying to exfiltrate those individuals to first aid tents and other things, when those officers needed to be focusing on crime. So there's something around, whilst we have a brilliant, London Ambulance, St John's Ambulance, HEMS attend and deal with the sort of the serious end of stuff, and our officers rightly got involved in trying to save lives, trying to dealing and responding and being the first officers on scene to deal with some of the most traumatic injuries, including the case where the lady subsequently tragically died. And officers worked on their own for many minutes trying to sort of save her life and others. And so that clearly falls within our core responsibilities, and properly so. And the officers, I think, have done a brilliant job in incredibly challenging circumstances. Where we need others to step in is when we're dealing with people that are just intoxicated. And so I think that 1,200, that was the absolute minimum. That was the minimum. And if we were sort of being more purist about it or clearer about it, there's many more roles that we could probably get stewards to do.
Thank you. And it's interesting you say that, because we just passed a motion that I brought to plenary last week about medics in the nighttime economy in Hackney, building on the model that they have medics so that police officers aren't attending people being intoxicated. So, Sophie, I just wanted to come to you as Deputy Mayor for this area. Just, is there anything else, just hearing what Assistant Commissioner has said, about any more support that the GLA events team or MOPAC itself could provide? Maybe this model around the medics, or anything to kind of substitute those roles so that police can focus on other things.
I'm sure there is, and I think that's, I'm sorry, I genuinely don't mean this as sloppy shoulders. I'm sure there is, and I think that's something that needs to be one of the core questions for debrief and looking at how to make Carnival safer for next year. I mean, I've already talked about the funding that the Mayor puts in for stewarding, but we also, MOPAC and the Met also fund the Safer Spaces, which is particularly focused for women around violence against women and girls and safer spaces. But I have visited them at previous carnivals, and they are particularly, they are looking after women as well who have felt unsafe or are unsafe, and need some time out from carnival. So I'm absolutely sure there are, and I think it is the sort of, that's definitely one of the routes we want to get to with Carnival, isn't it? Is that actually the police are there to do their core policing role, and it is managed and stewarded in a way that the police don't have to be doing that role. Because I think the Assistant Commissioner is right. You want Carnival to be absolutely to be safer, but you don't want it to be over-policed. At the moment, if you looked at Carnival, you see a lot of police there, but they are there because they are there to keeping the crowd safe. And they, as I said at the beginning, they do a very, very good job at doing that.
Okay, thank you. Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Thank you. AC Twist, you made an extraordinary comment earlier on when you said it's not for the Met to have a hand in the design of the event. Do you hold to that?
Thank you, Lord Bailey. Yeah, we're not the event organiser. We provide, in the same way of anybody who's organising any event, the guidelines and responsibilities are set out in the Purple Guide in terms of sort of events that people attend, the Green Guide in terms of other sporting events. The police don't organise events. We provide a policing response to support events and to where our core responsibilities are engaged, and that can be from no policing whatsoever through to significant number of resources. But we, of course, will work with the organisers, we'll work with the partners. We're not saying it's nothing to do with us, nothing to see here, but I think it's very important to know that it is not the police who are responsible for the organising of the event, and we will sort of provide a appropriate and proportionate policing overlay to the event that is organised.
Given the scale of this event and the tragic histories involved in this event, don't you think that you should be a little bit more involved in the design of this event? It's impossible, to my mind, to have a community organisation not lean heavily on you. You just talked about 1,200 officers doing things that you'd rather they didn't, if you're not in at the very, very earliest stage. This is clearly an organisation that need more support if they're ever going to deliver a safe carnival.
Yeah. So I don't disagree with what you said, Lord Bailey. I think the organisation needs more support, and we are in at the earlier stage. From the debrief of this year to the starting of planning next year, we work, totally in concert with the Notting Hill Carnival Trust Limited, but we are not the event organiser. And where things become difficult is when officers or the police are seen to assume some sort of role of event organiser. And if I sort of think about it, it's really important that we have clarity as to who is responsible for delivering what in this context. Because absent clarity, there exists a grey area where things like public safety can fall between the gaps. And we will help, we will advise, we will guide, we will suggest recommendations. And the letters that I've written backwards and forwards to the chair of the Carnival Trust outline some of the support that we're trying to provide and guide them. But we must not and we cannot assume the role of the event organiser.
I accept it's not your event to organise, but you must accept there's can be over 1 million people on the streets of London. If you haven't had a hand in saying exactly how that should look, it will fall on you and Londoners. I'd find that statement incredible, and I get it. There's legal issues for you. You don't want to take on that. I fully accept that, but. I was born in that era. I come from the community that started the carnival. I understand how precious it is. There's a growing number of us who believe it will be lost through some horrific event, and the only way to prevent that is for the likes of you to step slightly more into the breach. And to say you won't be involved in the design of the event is almost scary.
So I don't want to my comments to be misinterpreted. It is not for the police to determine how the event is constructed. We will advise, and we will do our very best to work with the organiser to provide a policing overlay for what they are planning. But it is their event, and they are, in terms of how many floats, in terms of how many sound systems, in terms of how many stalls, in terms of all of those things, and there's a split responsibility actually. The event organiser organises some of it, the local authorities license some of it, the police provide a policing overlay. And in the same way we don't organise any other event, we provide a policing response and work closely with the organisers. We're not in no way do I want this to be felt or seen that in any way we're stepping back, because we are a key partner to the organisers in this, because there will need to be a policing response. But the organiser, and to your point at the start, the organisation of Carnival needs to be really professional. It needs to be led by those with significant experience in event management, and indeed the organiser, they've done this a lot, so they know what they're doing. But I think my own assessment is, resourcing is a challenge, and what I don't want to do, I don't want it to be felt that police should step in to organise something because resourcing of that organisation is a challenge, because that brings with it the risk of conflation of core responsibilities, and the organiser is responsible for the event management and the crowd safety, and we will work with them and put in place contingencies should that plan break down, that we can step in and save life. And in the same way, in line with our core responsibilities, we will put in place plans and policing plans to prevent crime, to preserve the King's peace, and to save life where we need to intervene as a matter of urgency.
It's a theme I think we'll return to, but in the interest of time, I'm going to come to you, Deputy Mayor. You made the comment that you are not operationally in control of policing, which is something that we all know and you often trumpet. Do you think that the Mayor's office should be more involved with the organisation then? Because it is clear that they are struggling, and the police have stated their position. And I understand, particularly from a police officer's view, why you might want to be there. But if somebody doesn't do something, people actually die. And we are all worried that will increase as the popularity of the event increases. So what steps can MOPAC take, and have any been taken, additional new steps, to up the professionality of the organisers? Because there's a strong argument that they are struggling.
So to be honest, I don't recognise the picture you're painting of the Metropolitan Police or the GLA or City Hall or MOPAC, in that you appear to be painting a picture that we're stepping back and leave Notting Hill Carnival to organise and to make sure that the event is as safe as it can be. I don't recognise that picture.
Excuse me, you said that. The officer made a comment and you made a comment. I never painted any picture. I responded to comments that you made. You
have painted a picture of the Metropolitan Police and now are asking, well, what is the GLA doing? Because it appears that we're not doing much.
No,
I have outlined, let me just outline the structures that are in place to support and work with Notting Hill Carnival Limited. There are significant structures in place. There's the Strategic Partnership Group, which is chaired by Kensington and Chelsea, and which the GLA sits as well. There is the Strategic Funders Group as well, to ensure, as far as it can, and we've already heard that resourcing is an issue, as far as it can, that there are resources, and that funding of £946,000 from the Mayor goes into the Notting Hill Carnival Limited in order to pay for more stewarding and some more event management. And then, of course, during the course of the event, there is the Gold Group, which is chaired by a GLA officer and is a partnership group. So there is a really significant partnership structure that is leaning in to support and help and work with Notting Hill Carnival Limited. Post this carnival, there is going to be the debrief, which is going to happen very shortly, and a look at, well, what else needs to happen to make sure that it is as safe as possible. We in the GLA and MOPAT will lean in as much as we can to work with the partnership to ensure that next year's carnival is as safe as possible. We have already been doing that since 2016, alongside our partners with Kensington and Chelsea, Westminster and the Metropolitan Police. It's a significant partnership effort. And I don't totally recognise the picture you're painting.
Well, the picture I'm painting is based on the fact that we've had murders and high level of crime. The OC went through the things that happened at this current year's carnival. So it's not a picture I'm painting, it's a response to the facts. And the only point I'm making is, right, I would like to see, as a member of that community, a little bit more help for Notting Hill Carnival Limited. AC, sorry to speak if you're not here, AC Twist made a comment about professionals. They could do with some more professional support, I suppose, according to AC. What is the GLA doing about that? And you can talk about all the pictures I'm painting, but you cannot get away from the fact, as displayed by my colleague AM Desai, that there is many significant problems on the ground. And they are manifesting themselves in terrified locals and murdered visitors. That's what's happening. So the idea that there's lots of meetings going on, great, but are they actually effective? Chair, back to you.
So the Strategic Partnership Group has been meeting throughout the course of last year and through every year it meets. Last year there was a crowd safety study that was commissioned, and its recommendations were looked at to be implemented, and that's part of the Strategic Partnership Group's work, has been to work with Notting Hill Carnival Limited to implement those recommendations. And again, that debrief and the look at what can be done to make carnival safe is going to be incredibly important this year. It is a partnership, the partnership is leaning in to support the Notting Hill Carnival Limited. They do a good job. It is a difficult, it's a challenging, the numbers are incredibly challenging. What the partnership needs to do is work with them and support them in ensuring that there is professional event management, a professional event management team, and the proper, plan to ensure that the carnival is safe as possible. I don't disagree with you, and nor does I know Assistant Commissioner Matt Twist doesn't disagree with you about the need for change, the need to make sure that carnival is safer, not just because of crime, but actually really considerably because of the numbers and the crowds that attend Notting Hill Carnival, so that we can ensure that it is as safe as possible. Of course, the debrief, I expect to come up with recommendations, and we've got to make sure as a partnership we all lean in to support Notting Hill Carnival Limited to ensure that those recommendations are implemented.
Chair, just to be, I'll be very quickly.
Very quick.
The recommendations are one thing, it's the ability to implement those recommendations. You talk about a crowd management plan. Has anybody tested the ability for that to be delivered? That's the kind of thing I think that they could really get some support with. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on in a minute, but one very quick question. How much did it cost the Metropolitan Police this year?
So it's in the millions. I haven't got an exact figure. It's in the millions. We've got 7,500 officers working on the bank holiday Monday doing extended shifts.
I'm more than aware. I've looked it all out. I just wondered. I've
been
been told around 11 million.
It's
Does that 11.8 million?
Yeah,
so it's cost the Metropolitan Police, which is pushed to the extreme at the moment, 11.8 million, and it's cost City Hall $1 million.
Just under $1 million.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, we'll leave that. Then one quick point though: since 2016, since you brought that date up, 2,024 people have been arrested. 273 officers have been injured, 78 people have been stabbed, and 3 people, very, very sadly, have lost their lives. I think you'll get the impression that something has to be done about this. Right, for time reasons, we've got to move on. Assembly Member Desai.
Again to you, AC Twist. So what main challenges did the Met face in policing the recent disorders seen in London following the Southport attack?
Thank you. So we saw significant challenges, but I think at the top level, the disorder that we saw in the north of England and parts of the Midlands didn't spread in the same way to London. Indeed, we supported other forces sending mutual aid up to the north of England to provide additional support to sort of northern forces in dealing with that. We didn't it didn't completely pass us by though, and linked to the disorder, we made 162 arrests, most of those related to events in Whitehall on the 31st of July. Of that, 60 people have been charged with offences committed linked to that. 44 were charged and put in custody, 14 were sent as a result of summons. And of the 44 that were charged in custody, 16 have subsequently been convicted, the longest sentence for which was 46 weeks. I think the Met's response to disorder, we sort of broadly fell into three areas. So I think it was the sort of mass public order operation to keep the public safe. So we rapidly, when we knew of the protest on the 31st of July, we rapidly mobilised a lot of resources and were able to deal with the level of protest that we were faced with. It's fair to say that officers in London and across the country indeed turned up to work knowing that they may have to, during that shift, face extreme violence, hate, in order to protect communities. We had to pull some significant resourcing levers within the Met, so we moved our response teams and others to 12-hour shifts so we could generate additional resource to deal with the potential for disorder. And as I mentioned, we supported the national policing effort by deploying 200 officers to support other forces. I think the second limb was around the extra protection and reassurance effort within communities. We were very keen not to abstract neighbourhood officers to support the public order response in this case, because they are the very officers that are there providing reassurance and protection operations to communities, vulnerable premises. And we did a huge amount in terms of meeting with communities and providing a visible presence locally in high footfall areas in order to deter crime and to give that sort of sense that, you know, law and order is present and we absolutely need to win the day here. And I think the final point that's worth mentioning in terms of the sort of three areas is the collective mobilisation of the criminal justice system to accelerate bringing perpetrators of violent disorder to justice. As was the case in 2011, and I was sort of working in 2011 when we saw the last sort of disorder in London at that scale, whilst the policing played a part, actually the rapid mobilisation of the criminal justice system, the ability to gather evidence quickly, to charge offenders quickly, to put them before the court and to get to sentencing quickly had the greatest deterrent effect and had the biggest effect, in my view, on sort of preventing the continuation of the violence. And our teams worked around the clock to bring charges against those that were involved. A number of people from the 31st of July ended up being bailed the following day because we didn't have enough evidence. We needed to be set up better to move faster on that. But within a short number of days, we had those people back in and we had those people charged, because we had sort of mobilised and we had really sort of focused on that criminal justice outcomes, knowing how important it is to sort of, one, the justice is being done, but more importantly, in this case, it's seen to be done.
Thank you. So again, to you, this question is to both of you. So the Prime Minister was very right to warn the keyboard warriors that they don't live in a law-free zone. How much of a policing threat does persistent online misinformation pose?
I mean, I can go first. I mean, I think it's really significant. It's a growing and pervasive threat. The concept of fake news, misinformation, driven by a variety of things, whether that's online bots, sort of just amplifying to a huge extent news that is highly partial, biased, or at worst, just completely fake. There are echo chambers that operate online that assist in sort of stirring things up and radicalising individuals. And an awful lot of this is based on stuff that simply isn't true. So the challenge of the online space is not new. It's not something that is surprising. But it's very clear that in the sort of span of dealing with protest and dealing with public order since probably 2016, when I'd sort of say this really started to become a feature, but latterly it's got, increasingly pervasive, increasingly insidious. The people peddling fake news in order to generate a reaction, and then generating an overreaction or misrepresenting things that have happened by putting a clip on social media of 5 seconds of something that later turns out to be a 15-minute interaction, is working to undermine confidence in the state, it's working to undermine confidence in policing, and is working to make, exacerbate divisions in society. The result of that can be some of the events that we saw in the north of England and to a lesser extent in London. So I think fake news, I think online echo chambers, I think, insidious attempts to manipulate those people that are online is a real challenge for us in policing public order in the weeks, months and years to come.
Deputy Mayor, have you got anything further to add to what AC Twist has said, particularly in terms of what can be done or what is being done?
I think the threat...
I don't know where we are with the online safety bill. There have been so many twists and turns.
Yeah, there's been a lot of twists and turns with the online safety bill. I think the threat of division and hatred and violence that's perpetrated online is one of the most frightening things that's happened in recent years. And it does feel out of control. And we've seen what the misinformation and disinformation online, and we've seen how that created and stoked and fueled some of the disorder that took place over the summer. We know, we've talked about it before, the online safety bill had lots of twists and turns, was watered down quite considerably by the previous government. It's now, it's now been enacted. We're waiting for Ofgem to provide the guidance around online safety. They've got to put the new safety duties in place, and Ofgem have a role in that. The Mayor was very clear after the disorder that we needed to really look at how robust the online safety bill is, because are there the levers? Are there the powers to really be able to deal with the disinformation and misinformation and the hatred online that is causing and has caused? It's not just that it can spark and fuel disorder; it sparks and fuels the hatred that we see being perpetrated, not just online, but then comes out into the real world as well. I think we've got to, we've been urging ministers and the Prime Minister to look at the online safety bill and to really think about, are the levers strong enough, and to really ensure that Ofgem provide the guidance as soon as possible, because it's a growing problem and a growing threat.
Okay. One final question before I ask you 2 questions about the Gaza marches. So I attended the event earlier this week where the Deputy Mayor was also present, where the Director General of MI5 warned about the growing threat of far-right-wing extremism. And to be fair, he also talked about the activities of Islamist groups, but he was concerned about the growing far-right threat. So to what extent do you believe that very far-right-wing or neo-Nazi groups were involved in all these disorders, in London? And what are you doing to tackle this?
So thank you. So, I'm not going to comment on anything the Director General of MI5 has said. That will be, his comments will stand as they are. I think for us, it's very clear that we are seeing an increased polarisation within society, and that is to the left and the right, actually. And we are seeing larger numbers turn out for right-wing demonstrations than we have seen previously. And that in part is fueled by politics. It's in part fueled by sort of information, misinformation, and people following different things. We've seen it across Europe. We've seen the rise in sort of cultural nationalist parties across Europe and the rise in nationalism in different sort of countries. And to an extent, that is also happening here. So this presents a policing challenge, and I think some of those involved are working quite hard to undermine confidence in policing on these points. I think we've heard the sort of 2-tier policing narrative, which is a bit of a catchy catchphrase, for want of a better word, a useful soundbite for those seeking to criticise or undermine without actually constructively adding to the debate, the setting out a sort of sense of grievance that we're doing stuff for one group and not another, which of course is not true. we police without fear or favour, and according to the law as it is, not as others might wish it to be. And so the core role for policing in this is to be independent of the politics, to be independent of the cause, to be independent of whatever the protest is, and to uphold the law. And in so doing, it's fair to say we're not going to make everybody happy. But I think, to answer your question, am I concerned about the right? Well, what I'm concerned about is the polarisation and division in society the Deputy Mayor has mentioned, because I think it's societal cohesion and or lack of it, and increased division fueled by fake news sometimes, that is going to be one of the great challenges we face.
To be fair, there was also a high-profile arrest at an anti-racist protest in Walthamstow. But just two more questions about Gaza, Chair, and I'm conscious of the time. So, AC Twist, I've been, well, not just I, but a lot of us, most Londoners, I think, have been concerned, or many Londoners, at some of the open displays of anti-Semitism that we've seen in some of the Gaza marches over the last year. This week, the Policy Exchange released a report in which you say that the Met did not get everything right in policing the Gaza protests. Where did you see the shortcomings in the Met's response, and how has it impacted the Met's response to future public order incidents?
Thank you. So it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, this week we've had two reports published on protest, one from the Policy Exchange and one from His Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, looking at impartiality within policing. I mean, I think my comments to the Policy Exchange stand as they were said at the time. And what I said to the interviewer was, when I look back at the policing of protests over the last 8 months, we know that we didn't get everything right, particularly in the early stages in October. We've developed tactics since then, becoming faster and more decisive. On occasion, we did not move quickly enough to make arrests. For example, somebody who was chanting for jihad, which was a decision made in the fast time, following advice from lawyers and CPS. But we're now much more focused on identifying reasonable grounds for arrest, acting when needed, and then investigating. So in circumstances such as those, it is much more likely we would make arrests now. I think there's some context that's important as well to know, to sort of within this, in that at the start of this in October, our frame of reference for dealing with this type of protest was the two previous sets of protest activity linked to Israel and Gaza, which had happened in the sort of late 2000s and the early 2000s, where we were faced with serious disorder. That hasn't happened on this, and I accept and I agree with the point that we have seen, and I've been clear throughout, that in the marches, which have been, we've now had 18 national marches, and we've had a number of midweek events and assemblies, the latest of which is going to be tonight, where we've got another assembly organised by the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign outside Downing Street. We have seen individuals who are committing offences linked to anti-Semitism, linked to religious hate crime, linked to prescription offences and supporting of Hamas. And as the time has moved on, and actually very quickly post-October, so by early November, we had adopted new tactics. We were much more able, prepared to spot and intervene to deal with those people who were committing offences at that moment in time. And I think that is the position that must continue. It's very clear, speaking to the Jewish community and leaders within the Jewish community, and I've been to a number of events and spoken at a number of forums, and both with community leaders and with rabbis and others, the fear that is alive within their community, based on the number of sort of protest events that have happened, based on their sort of their worry about that and how it impacts on their lives. And the police have the very difficult job of balancing everybody's rights here, and we're balancing the rights of those to go about their lawful business with the rights of those to protest. And as I said in answer to my previous question, our job is to uphold the law, and we'll do the very best we can so to do.
Chair, you've answered my second question. Can I just wish you and your office as well, in terms of policing very, very difficult situations. I should also make the observation that some £42 million have been spent policing the Gaza marches. very important that we protect defend the right to march, but this money should be coming from central government. In terms of NIC, National International Capacity Grant, we asked the previous government to reimburse that money, and we of course got to ask this government, my government, that the Met should get this help. I think we should put that on record. We've got to be consistent in approach.
Yeah, we do. I'm going to come to Assemblymember Moa for a very quick one in a minute, but I'm just going to pick up on something. You've mentioned the two-tier policing. Do you actually understand why so many believe there's two-tier policing? And if I go back to, I mean, I've got those words. This is a very interesting policy exchange report that you've just read out your own words in it. You admit you got things wrong. Some of the communities will see that you were more lenient then, and I'm very happy that you're actually arresting more people now. But many of my Jewish friends don't want to come into London. They're frightened, they're scared, and they feel it. And this is where this two-tier policing is coming from. I understand how difficult it is for you, I do. But you admit here that you didn't always get things right. When we see pictures of people with signs saying Hamas is a terrorist organisation and then being moved away, when actually what they're saying on the banner is completely correct, that would be seen as being not fair to them. Now, I'm sure you've got an answer, but when this all plays out on social media, as all these things now are, you can see why people think that's not fair. And the British public put up with an awful lot of different things, but when they think something isn't fair, that's when you get trouble.
Yeah. So thank you. I mean, I'll touch on a couple of points then. Social media is probably a good place to start. A lot of what's happening and is what is being posted on social media is designed to increase division, is designed to increase or to reduce confidence in the policing response to this. And I'll give some examples that I just know to be true because I've seen them firsthand. We see, if we go back to, and I've been present for more than not of the large Palestinian marches, and when we go back to even the 11th of November, we saw respected outlets and elected representatives retweeting and reposting images of a large group of Muslim people praying in the grounds of Westminster Abbey and pointing out that the Met had lost control. Only this was an image from 2016 or 2017 when they had been invited to be there as part of a multi-faith conference. In terms of the specific offences, and I've discussed this a number of times, of course it's distressing and of course it is upsetting for members of the community to see people with placards that are either anti-Semitic or pro-Hamas committing attack offences. One of the things that we've noticed is that, and I'll give an example of the two suspects that were wearing Hamas headbands that's sort of quite popular. And we managed to intervene and arrest those people on the day, not because we spotted them wearing Hamas headbands, but because we had seen them on social media wearing those headbands at the start of the march. They had worn them for a very short period of time. They'd taken them off and put them in their pockets and then gone along the march. And the work that we had done lifetime through what we call our Voyager teams, which is our team sort of interfacing with social media and our CCTV footage and officers on the ground, was enabled, even though the fact that they had taken that image, they had snapped it, they'd posted it on social media, then they'd taken the things off, we managed to catch them further down the route, and they were actually wearing the things up towards Park Lane, and we actually caught them down in Trafalgar Square. But the point being is that the damage was done by that 10-second or 20-second moment where they were wearing that image and wearing that headband and they posted it. The impression was given that they were just blithely walking past officers and we were doing nothing, which is completely wrong. I think in terms of placards, it's a really difficult area of law as well, in that we have, as I said, we've become sharper, more assertive in intervening where we think there may be reasonable grounds for an offence, irrespective of whether or not we now think that there may be a likelihood of prosecution, which is a matter for the CPS. We have had some cases prosecuted. We have had others where the CPS have declined so to do because the wording is contested. the wording has been used a number of times in different contexts over the years, and as with any wording, some things are clearly an offence, so anything that supports Hamas is clearly an offence under the TACT legislation. But other things, there's going back to sort of the judgment in Redmond Bate, where the Court of Appeal was very clear that offensive, unwelcome, blasphemous language isn't unlawful. So we have a very difficult line to follow. We, as I said, we are not taking any risks here. Where we think people might be inciting hatred, where we think they might be committing offences under the Public Order Act, and certainly where we think they are being anti-Semitic, then we are intervening quickly and we are seeking to bring those people to justice. What we have seen, I think it's fair to say, and last weekend we saw, I was in on Saturday, last weekend we made, I think, 6 arrests. Some of them were linked to placards. Over the span of the protests, we've seen the number of people attending reduce significantly to a fairly steady 10,000 or so. So we were looking at sort of 300,000 in November last year, down to about 60,000. Now on every third weekend, we're seeing about sort of 8 to 10,000 would be our assessment, although we don't go into numbers particularly, but it's that sort of scale of thing. We're also seeing the number of homemade placards and banners reduce significantly compared to where we were, I think in part at least because of the robust stance that we've taken on it. So I accept all of the points. I understand and have heard firsthand from the community why community members are fearful. And my message is that we are doing all we can to enforce the law.
Okay, thank you for that. Assembly Member Mohammed, very, very quickly, because we are really running very over.
I will be very quick. Good morning to you both. My question is to Assistant Commissioner Twist, and it relates to the Gaza marches. And so a number of us have been contacted by members of the Jewish community regarding routes that pass synagogues, particularly in Westminster. And it's just really a question of reassurance from the Met that there have been concerns that the start times of some of the marches led by the Palestine Solidarity Campaign have coincided with Sabbath services. And I understand that in an effort to try and manage some of that, the Met had suggested that a march start after people had left and had gone home so that those could continue. But that has not been followed. So just wanted reassurance from you that the police will continue to make sure that as far as possible, those times are stuck to. People are understandably quite concerned, and also bearing in mind that that there was a meeting point that was told to attendees, which was just meters from one of the synagogues in question. It's particularly alarming. So I think it'd be really great to reassure Jewish Londoners in particular.
Thank you, Assembly Member. There's a couple of really important points in there. And if there are assembly points just meters from synagogues, I'm unaware of them. I'll touch on that in a moment, though. I mean, in London, it's hard to be far away from anything. So there's a context of it in the sort of urban environment in which we're operating. I think the first thing to say is in response to these marches, we have used our powers under the Public Order Act to precondition under Section 12 and Section 14, which is linked to assemblies and marches, to a greater extent than at any other time in, I think, the history of the Public Order Act since 1986. We have imposed preconditions on every one of these marches linked to the starting time, the place, the route, the assembly, the finish time. And we've done so because it's been felt necessary, and we saw early on, absent these conditions, groups will veer off and try and sort of continue protesting later into the evening or go into the West End. And what we have seen is where conditions have been used, that hasn't happened, and we've been able to enforce it. I think the point you make is timely on the, and I think you're referring to last weekend where the sort of position changed. And if I can just have 1 minute on that, I won't go into the details because I don't want to I don't want to talk about individuals or individual premises or locations. But in the run-up to last weekend, and I was closely involved and briefed, the decision was made to impose a different starting location from what the PSC had originally wanted, and that was primarily due to other events that were going on in Parliament Square and Trafalgar Square, which would have conflicted with it, and also a later start time than was usual. And the reason that that later start time, which would have been a 2:30 start time, was imposed was because on the route there was a venue that was holding an event that would have gone on later than normal. So the Shabbat services that take place in most synagogues, we know roughly what time they finish, but there was an event ongoing close to the route that was going on later. We imposed these conditions on the basis of representations made by lawyers and also representations made by the community, which were proportionate and necessary to mitigate the risk of serious disruption to that event. We were then, there was then questions asked, and this is a matter of public record, I think, publicised by the PSC, that they sought to challenge those conditions. And I was set to robustly defend the conditions that we had imposed. And I think, in my view, with a very high likelihood of success, because my assessment was we had properly balanced the rights of those seeking to protest, and we had imposed what would be, whilst it was an hour and a half difference, what would be overall a quite small restriction on those seeking to protest, weighed against a reducing the serious impact it would have had on others. So we were prepared to robustly defend that. At the last moment, the event which we were seeking to protect was cancelled, which meant that we no longer had the sort of lawful justification. It was no longer proportionate and necessary to delay the march by that period of time. So we delayed it by a little bit, but we changed the start time to a slightly earlier time because we couldn't evidence the direct serious disruption that would have been caused by keeping it at that point. And had I gone to court on that point, I think we would have lost. So the final point to say, I think, is that wasn't a matter of us. It may have been represented as one thing or another in the media, but that was a matter of us assessing carefully and balancing the rights of those that are seeking to protest with those that are impacted by it, by forming what I think was a robust and sort of sensible decision, and then actually having to review that, as we always do, based on new information. The final point I'll make, so I'm conscious, Chair, you need to move on, is that we had warned 1,000 officers to police that march because there was some suggestion that either people wouldn't comply with the later start time or others. So in the latter part of that week, we had warned significantly extra officers and had detailed plans in place to make absolutely certain that the community wouldn't have been seriously disrupted, and I had very high confidence in those plans. So any suggestion that the police were unable or unwilling to provide to ensure that those conditions were enforced is wrong.
Okay, thank you. Assembly Member Duval, very, very quickly, and a very, very quick answer, please.
Look, we should be thanking you today because your attendance here is quite important in terms of explaining the mission of policing and answering our questions of concerns. And you need to tell your superiors they made a mistake by being absent. No disrespect to the Deputy Mayor who held her own in terms of those debates, but it's important that senior officers of the Met explain the way that they're conducting their business to build that trust and confidence that we both desire in terms of policing. Now, I just very quickly want to say the difference between 2011 response in terms of writing and looking into what happened outside London was actually the firm and robust response to the evening outside Downing Street, where the police made it very clear that they weren't putting up with unlawful conduct. I believe, I'd like to know your views, that stopped a number of copycat occurrences across London, Accra 2011, but also stopped opportunist criminal activity that may have been on the back of any other political issues. Have you got a view on that? because it certainly was a turning point, and just recognising some of the tactics outside London, whereas I think some of those disturbances, no, I'm not asking you to comment on other police forces and how they do it, they've got to make their decisions at their time, but clearly they send some of the wrong messages in terms of what we as a democratic society tolerate in terms of behaviour and conduct in peaceful protests, or not peaceful protests.
If we can just have
And
a very brief
secondly,
answer.
just very quickly, can
then.
you provide us with written evidence? You've talked about the abstraction and safer neighbourhood teams. For a good part of summer, we've not, my constituency hasn't had safer neighbourhood team capacity. I wondered if you could write to us and tell us what the new abstraction policy is that you've alluded to, where you're protecting the safer neighbourhood teams, and some of that BCU response around how you're policing these demonstrations.
I will be brief, Chair. I know you want to move on. So firstly, thank you, Mr Duval. I mean, the first thing to say is that I'm not really sure who you refer to as my superiors. I mean, the Commissioner charges me with leading the Met for public order and major events. So if there's any criticism of this or our presence or our response, then that rests with me.
No, it's a different subject. We'll bring it up.
Subject.
in a
It's
minute.
about attendance at this meeting,
I see.
explaining
Yeah,
about
we'll
policing
come back
action.
to this.
Apologies, we may revisit that. In terms of the firm and robust response, I think on the 31st of July, yes, we deployed a lot of officers, and we were very clear that we were not prepared to tolerate crime or disorder, and we imposed, as we have done with many other marches, we imposed conditions on that, and we were prepared to enforce those conditions, and that was the start point for the evening. I think, yes, it did help. I think a sort of a significant response on that night, and then a significant number of arrests, 111 on the night, and then rapid charging, as I alluded to in earlier evidence, the effectiveness of the criminal justice system helped significantly. In terms of neighbourhood abstraction, yeah, of course, we can write. One of the things we've done in the last 12 months is include in everybody's shift pattern what we call a 4+2, whereby previously those that weren't working on BCUs, on boroughs, a lot of people worked Monday to Friday, whereas in people's rotas now we've included 4 weekends plus Notting Hill plus New Year's Eve. So that means that we've got a much greater pool of people to call on, and we're using, to a much greater extent, non-borough officers, particularly for what I would call level 3 aid, which is where you don't need to be specially public order trained for the lower risk events, which is significantly reducing the abstractions that you're seeing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, can I just commend you in your involvement in the policy exchange report, because the police's perspective from their mouth, I think, is very important and goes a long way to support the morale of your officers on the front line. What impact do you think this disorder is having on individual Met officers, and do you have the resources to support their mental health around this and just being in the job in general?
Thank you, Lord Bailey. I've been involved in policing public order in different roles in different ways since 1997, when I first did it as a constable, as a sort of level 2 officer doing public order, and latterly sort of leading the Met Met Operations Business Group. I think this is by far the most sustained and period of demand that we have seen, and it really started in October of 2022, where we have seen sort of the chronic demand created by the daily environmental protest linked to JSO, which meant that we had to resource that for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. We've then seen a number of very significant national events, the sort of back to normal post-COVID, and then since October of 23, we've seen the sort of the much more acute demand in terms of the protests that we've seen linked to Palestine and Gaza. So this is by far the busiest period that we've had, and just to sort of put some figures on it, and these are just very rough figures. You know, just last year we used over 34,000 shifts dealing just with JSO. We used many tens of thousands of shifts dealing with state occasions and other things, and we've used in terms of what we call Operation Brox, which is our response to the Israel and Gaza, we have used 2024 34,000 shifts so far, including 4,000 on mutual aid. Last year it was 26,000 shifts and sort of 5,000 on mutual aid. So all of these shifts are officers that are abstracted from their communities, from their normal jobs in the main, aside from a very small number that would sit within my task force. So the demand is huge. It means longer shifts. It means cancelled rest days. And to your point, you know, what's the resilience of the organisation? What's the resilience of the individuals? I mean, the resilience is remarkable, and I always assure people that the Met will always be there. We're very good at doing this sort of stuff, but there is an impact on the people. And these are the same officers that on one shift will be working in communities, will be working on response teams, will be working in investigations, that are now sort of stepping up to work in things like Notting Hill, protests, state occasions, other things. So it is a very busy period. We have got a number of schemes in place to support our officers with their mental health, and a number of sort of ways they can reach out and seek that support. But I wouldn't be right if I didn't say that it's been a very challenging period for those officers, and there's and I think that's going to continue.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to you, Chair, because you're under time pressure.
Yes, we'll draw a close on that. The only reason I've let it run so long is we all feel very passionately about these various subjects, so we'll have to lose some other sections further on. So we're now moving on to the London Policing Board, and those questions are started by Assembly Member Moema.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to the Deputy Mayor. And it's around the impact of the London Policing Board and how that's worked in its first year of operation. But I think just in reference to the comments that my colleague Assembly Member Duval made, I think the frustration is that the establishment of the London Policing Board, which was a recommendation from the Casey Review, seems to have substituted any attendance or accountability from the Met rather than from MOPAC, which was the frustration being shared. It has been really difficult for us to fulfil our role as a committee because of that lack of attendance and therefore accountability. So whilst I welcome the fact that the Policing Board is a meeting that takes place in public and can be viewed, it has substituted this. There is no doubt, I think, in most Assembly members' minds. But with that context, it would be really helpful to understand what impact the board has made since it's been established, from your perspective.
Thanks a lot. I mean, you all know, I mean, you referenced it anyway, that the establishment of the board was one of the recommendations coming out of the Casey Review in order to improve the transparency and accountability and of the challenge and the oversight to the Metropolitan Police, and also to improve the support to the Metropolitan Police. I think that's an important part of the work of the board as well. In terms of the impact of the board, you all know also that the first meeting of the board was last September, so it is the next meeting of the board is next week, so that will be 4 full meetings of the board that have taken place. In relation to impact, I think the board has, it has. Clearly, a board has to find its, as a corporate being, find its way. I think the board has made up of incredibly expert and experienced members, and that expertise and experience has meant that the challenge and the support that the Metropolitan Police is getting has increased. And it's also really important that it is the board takes place in public, because of the accountability and the transparency that gives. And I think that's really important, because I think one of the things that I know that's one of the reasons she recommended it, and she was very clear that it should be it wasn't just setting up a mayoral board that was needed, it was setting up a mayoral board that was going to conduct its business in public in order to improve the trust and confidence through transparency and accountability. In terms of the impact, the board has looked at violence against women and girls last December. I think it's, we have Andrea Simon on the board, who is expert in this and leads the End Violence Against Women's Coalition, but she's not the only member of the board that has expertise in terms of violence against women and girls, but also in terms of transforming. I think that the questioning that the board has honed down to all the areas that they look at, whether it be violence against women and girls, the children's strategy, the budget, neighbourhood policing, it really is about ensuring that understanding and challenging the Met on what is it that they are seeking to set out to achieve? What is the assessment? How are they going to evaluate it? And what are the metrics that are going to they can be held accountable for? And I think that because they've honed those questions down and very much look at those, that is what the Met know that they're going to be asked. And I think that has improved in terms of the work that they have looked at in transformation around the metrics. They know that they're going to be asked those questions. And it's like coming to Police and Crime Committee, isn't it? You know you're going to be asked the questions. So you are actually asking those questions. We've seen increased focus on children because of the work on the children's strategy, and we've seen increased focus on violence against women and girls and the action plan that's taken place. Of course, the work of the board and the impact of the board is not just through the formal board meetings or the committee meetings. Members of the board have also as part of their work, been into the Met and held meetings with the Metropolitan Police around the budget, where there's expertise around the budget, around expertise around data, performance data and statistics. Have had meetings around that to support and challenge the Metropolitan Police on that. They've also looked at the Leading for London training, attending meetings of that and feeding back their views of that, not just to board members but also to the Met, which is important. And they have also looked at had meetings in between on transformation. Members of the board have absolute expertise around transformation, so have been part of meetings around the transformation of the Met. And also we have a member of the board who now sits on the Met's professionalism reference group because of the acknowledgement of the expertise and the experience that they can bring, and the importance of ensuring that's used and they're able to challenge and support the Met, not just through the board meetings, but also through the work that takes place in between board meetings, which we all know when we've been members of boards or members of committees, a lot of work takes place outside of those meetings as well.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So in the period that the board has been established, there have been 4 meetings of it. And I understand that there are 17 members of it, including the Mayor, who chairs it, and obviously you attend with your colleagues, and as do the Metropolitan Police. I guess I would assume that other colleagues here would have a question in their mind about that doesn't sound materially different to what was happening previously, and a question therefore about how the establishment of the board was a recommendation, but what then that means for implementation of the changes and the systemic changes suggested through Casey for staff and for Londoners and for officers alike. Really, really excoriating report, but obviously we're looking to make positive changes. But I can't help but come back to that point about, yes, it has improved, I think, from the sound of it, a working relationship between MOPAC and the Metropolitan Police, but it has reduced visibility, even though your meeting is now taking place in public, which I think is counter to when I sat here and listened to Baroness Casey, what she was saying, kind of as a desired outcome. But are there, Assistant Commissioner Twist, in your opinion, any examples of constructive scrutiny and insight, and what benefits have there been for the Met from the work of the policing board? And I don't know whether the chair might want to come back about kind of how that relinks to this committee, because we also have a role in terms of accountability to Londoners, and that has been lacking since this board has been established.
Okay, well, thank you. And I'm going to be careful not to get drawn too much into some of the politics of this. I mean, I know the Commissioner and the Chair have exchanged letters in terms of our position on attendance at the PCC, and, clearly we recognise the importance of senior officers attending Police and Crime Committee, which is why I'm here today. And I think we've committed to attending 3 PCCs a year, as well as the policing plenary. What's clear is that between the PCC and the new London Policing Board, senior officers are attending more public meetings than we did before. There is more scrutiny than there was before, and that takes time, that takes preparation, that takes work for us to do that, and it's important that we do that. The London Policing Board does provide an opportunity for us to get external support and scrutiny of our delivery of the new Met for London plan. That's very clear, and there are some real experts on that board, as the Deputy Mayor has said. I mean, I'm not going to call out individuals, but certainly there are some experts in a range of areas that have been helpful on an individual basis that we can turn to ask those questions. Things like having London Policing Board members sit in on our first line leaders course have been, and then able to provide advice, to provide an external perspective on how best to engage our leaders to deliver the new Met for London plan has been sort of really useful. I think it's also, you know, worth noting, and when, as part of this debate, I don't have I genuinely am not sort of on one side or the other of it, but I think the accountability of the Met is really important, and we recognise the recommendations in Baroness Casey's report, and we want to be as transparent as possible. The Met is unique in terms of our accountability to the Home Secretary and to the Mayor in a way that no other force is. And also then subject to scrutiny from the London Assembly, parliamentary committees and others, including this committee and the London Policing Board. So I think the value in the London Policing Board comes in the expertise that is present on it, that we can call upon to support, and the experience that sits within it, that is in addition to the value that we get from this in public.
Thank you. Assembly Member Best.
Thank you. The Performance and Finance Subcommittee was scheduled to meet on the 17th of June, but that was cancelled. Do you know why?
That will have been because of the general election. It's a public meeting. I think that was, I can double check, but I'm pretty sure that's because of the pre-election period.
Okay. And do you know why it hasn't been rescheduled?
We have a meeting of the London Policing Board next week, and we are putting in place the diary for the following year, for the year coming. I'm pretty sure that we've got a date for the Finance Committee to meet in October.
And is that the same for the? You said for the finance one. Is that the same for the culture?
Yeah, all the dates are going in the diary at the moment because what has happened, the London Policing Board, we've done a piece of work around setting the work programme. That is going to come to the London Policing Board next week for final agreement, for final sign-off. And that work programme will then, influences who comes to which committee. And so it's been a little bit complicated, to be honest. And those dates are going in the diary at the moment and will be set out for the following year so that everybody knows when they're happening and what is going to be discussed at those meetings.
Okay, thanks. And the London Policing Board was supposed to replace the MOPAC oversight quarterly meetings. Why does it feel like it's replaced the PCC meetings of the London Assembly?
London Policing Board did replace the quarterly oversight meetings that I chaired, and just sort of in response to the Assembly Member Moema, I think it is a step change in terms of it being open, it being it being transparent and accountable, and it being held in public is a real step change. As I said, it did.
Do you realise how every word you say about the London Policing Board sounds like you're talking about the PCC? And every time you speak about it, it sounds like we're replicating something that already exists. And it actually flies in the face of what Baroness Casey suggested when she suggested something that looked similar to the TfL board meetings that are distinct and different from the meetings of the Transport Committee.
Baroness Casey absolutely knew the structures of governance, accountability, and understood what was happening within the Police and Crime Committee. She still went on to recommend the establishment of the London Policing Board. It doesn't replicate the Police and Crime Committee. It is distinct in itself. And she went on to recommend the London Policing Board, having looked at not just MOPAC's oversight arrangements, but also the oversight arrangements of the Assembly. She was not blind to the Police and Crime Committee. She came here, didn't she, to discuss the findings as well. So she recommended the London Policing Board to be like the TfL.
I'm not suggesting she is. I'm suggesting you and the Mayor are.
Well, We have set out to deliver the recommendation from Baroness Casey, and I think we have delivered that recommendation to shadow, or not to shadow, to be as near as possible to the Transport for London Board as it can be, given the different statutory requirements and the legislation that we operate under.
So can you talk to me about how the London Policing Board is providing value for money? And can you try and use a description that doesn't sound like you're talking about this committee?
I think it's a very good question to always look at whatever we're doing is whether it's good value for money and the spending of public money. What we will do is we are having discussions at the moment and making sure that we look at how has the London Policing Board operated over the last year and what lessons can be learned, and we are looking at how that review can take place, and of course that will also look at value for money, because we want to ensure that the money that is spent on the London Policing Board is provides the challenge, the scrutiny and the support that is necessary. And we are very clear that this is the board is evolving, the board is maturing, and we must make sure there's lessons learned, just as TfL does. TfL does an annual review, and we are going to do the same.
So it's an extra £1 million investment into data science for the London Policing Board.
It's not £1 million. The London Policing Board cost I think you're possibly putting together the money that has been invested in evidence and insight in making sure that there is a data science function, and there are better.
I just said that.
Yeah, but that's not the London. That's not that work of the evidence and insight team is not just for the London Policing Board. It is for the rest of MOPAC as well, and also for the accountability mechanisms and dashboards that will be able to be properly analysed. The London Policing Board itself and the cost of the London Policing Board is much smaller, and I think this year it's roughly £340,000 in terms of the support and the maintenance of the London Policing Board.
I mean, £340 might be good value. It's not £340 though. Well, it's not £340, is it?
What?
You said the value was £340.
No, I said the cost is £340,000.
Yeah, you said 340.
Well, that was a slip of the tongue.
Okay, I was just highlighting it wasn't 300. That probably would be good value, because from what I can see, board members are getting £15,000, and the expectation is 15 days' work. That's £1,000 a day. How are we making sure we're getting value for money out of that? And also, with a maximum of 8 meetings per year, what are those other days being used for? I know Professor John Ashton has had one more meeting on missing children and exploited children. What other kind of work are we getting out of the board members for those 15 days?
So the board members' expectation for board members was between 15 and 20 days' work on London Policing Board business. We, as MOPAC, sorry, it sounds like Big Brother, but we do assess and look at and track the use of that time to make sure that board members are not actually putting too much into what they're doing, because many of the board members are actually going far beyond the 15 to 20 days in the work that they're doing. I've already outlined some of the meetings that have taken place from the London Policing Board members, from budget to transformation to data statistics and analysis, not just around child exploitation, and Matt Twist has also referenced it, to looking at the the frontline leaders training. So there is a number of meetings have taken place, and work has taken place outside of board meetings and committee meetings by members. And of course, you all know this yourselves, and I know this, in order to be an effective board member and for board meetings themselves to be effective, you have to prepare. So there is also, as part of that, the preparation and the reading of the papers.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm paying someone £1,000 a day for work, then I probably expect the preparation to take place as part of that. £1,000 outside. I just wanted some more concrete examples of how all the members were using that, and perhaps is there a way to share that with the public more explicitly, the additional work that's been undertaken, because otherwise it does sound like a lot of money for 4 core meetings a year.
I think that's a fair challenge, to be more transparent in terms of the work of the board, so that that can be seen, and I'll look at that, about how that can be reported back and made more open. I think that's a fair challenge. I think, I've given you some concrete examples. So I've not given you the names or the dates, but I obviously can. So I think that's a fair challenge, and we'll look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I think I read somewhere it's £880,000 for staff and support staff plus other things. Assembly Member Moema.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, so you've responded to Assembly Member Best about a meeting that was unscheduled, and that was because of the pre-election periods that we've gone through. So is it the same in the case of the Policing Board's data pack that wasn't published in June because of the pre-election period?
The data pack, so there's the data pack was, I think the London Policing Board took place a couple of days before the data pack was ready, so a shorter data pack was published as part of the London Policing Board meetings. A couple of days later, the usual data pack has been published in June. Okay, so you're back on schedule with that publication round, with the data being available? So we've always been on, I'm pretty sure we've always been on schedule of the publication of the data. It was the Policing Board meeting itself came before the normal publication. Okay. So a shorter version was published for the Policing Board for the Policing Board meeting, but the full data pack has been published. Okay. And to both of you, the Commissioner said that the new Met for London plan is going to be essentially streamlined a little. It's going to be reset and reprioritised. And the reforms in it will be slower and narrower. And just wondered what your reaction to this is, and how this will impact the London Policing Board.
Maybe if I start, as it's the Commissioner that said it. I mean, I think, and as reflected in, acknowledged at least in the HMICFRS Peel inspection, we are making progress in delivering the new Met for London plan, but we've had to reprioritise within the constrained resources that we have. We're heading into 2025-26 with a challenging financial outlook. The HMICFRS pointed out in their most recent inspection that there is at least a £400 million budget gap next year, which, when you take out CT grant, that's 12% of our expenditure. So as a result, we have had to undertake an exercise to prioritise and sequence the delivery of the plan based on what we can now afford to do. That remains ongoing. The budget position remains challenging. It's something we need to work through in the coming months, so we can work out how much of what we want to do we can afford to do in the next financial year. So I think that's the context in which the Commissioner made those statements.
So it is, there's no getting away from it. It's really challenging in terms of the financial situation the Metropolitan Police finds itself after years of austerity. And at the moment, and this will be discussed next week at the London Policing Board, at the moment the Metropolitan Police are looking at that prioritisation, looking at the finances and looking at what they need to prioritise in the new Met for London plan. It is challenging and it is difficult. The London Policing Board, if you know, this is part of the London Policing Board, it has already questioned and challenged on the new Met for London plan. One of the things that, as part of this prioritisation, and which will come out at the end, is the London Policing Board has been very clear that it wants the metrics for the assessment of how that new Met for London plan is going to be delivered. Now, the Commissioner is going through this prioritisation process, so rightly those metrics need to be looked at, and at the end of that prioritisation process, those metrics will be available for the London Policing Board and will be published, and that will be the thing that the London Policing Board holds the Commissioner to account for.
So one of the things, this is from memory, but one of the things that the Casey report talked about, or some of the things, was around the levels of investment across different parts of the Met. So, for example, neighbourhood policing had suffered, it felt like, all the cuts, whereas things like Parliamentary and Diplomatic Command, where issues arose, to say the least, they had less so, and those parts of the Met that had equipment, guns and so on, did not, and they were able to request equipment almost at will. That's a bit of a mischievous recollection of it, but that's essentially how it read. And in this prioritisation of what will be delivered, because for Londoners, one of the main priorities is that reinstatement of neighbourhood policing and securing communities, making sure that we have visible policing that's also effective, and that those crimes like robbery, phone snatches, all those sorts of things, are addressed and dealt with. And I just wonder, in your conversations with the policing board, the level of granularity you have around what that rephasing will look like. I completely understand the financial reasons for that, but also if you are going to get to a level of granularity where you can share that with this committee, because we obviously have those concerns from our constituents' perspective, where the focus of over a period of years, as you say, kind of those cuts because of austerity, the focus has been on things that perhaps are a little bit more removed from an ordinary person who is dealing with antisocial behaviour, with all of the issues that better neighbourhood policing could better address.
You're absolutely right. Your recollection is right around, well, you know, one of the key findings of Baroness Casey's report was the diminution of the front line. The London Policing Board has certainly been looking at this. It had the neighbourhood at the June meeting. I think it was June. The June meeting had the paper on neighbourhood policing and the, you know, questioning of the Commissioner around how that was going to be delivered, and also, really importantly, what impact is that going to have? Because you can talk about numbers, you can talk about moving people, but the really important thing is what do you expect that impact to be, and how will you assess it and evaluate it? And again, going back to the questions of the London Policing Board, that's incredibly important. But I also think, you know, during the course of this meeting, I genuinely think we've seen the difference, the change in the Metropolitan Police around protecting the front line, or really understanding the impact on the front line, because, you know, Assistant Commissioner Matt Twist has already talked about how they have tried to make sure that the abstractions for public order policing don't just fall on the front line, that they have been balancing that throughout the organisation. That is, I think, a really important change, which we hadn't seen, that it was often frontline policing. They may still well be being abstracted, but they are not being abstracted to the same extent as before. That's a real difference. And it's certainly something, there's the London Policing Board that is looking at that, but it's certainly something as oversight from MOPAC, because obviously that continues as well. And in the budget setting from last year, one of the key questions we asked was, show us the proportion of the funding that's going to the front line, the proportion of the funding that's going to the specialist units, and what decisions are being made so that we could have that oversight of how this is looking throughout the Metropolitan Police.
Okay, Assembly Member Deval, very quickly.
Can I just go back to Casey and I was very much taken by your last response about what we're requiring is change and how we manage that. The policing board is very different to what Casey was envisaging and driving through some of the change arising out of her reports. The new Met for London, the cultural, attitudinal issues that needed to change for effective policing. So I don't mind the policing board, but I think it's right that we focus. Are they focusing on the right issues, given that the next item we're going to be talking about is performance and the inspection regime and what that chucks at the Met in terms of management issues. So I just want to go back to the issues. In amongst the policing board, you also abolished a number of different issues. We have touched on this previously around the London Crime Reduction Board. Now, of course, there was a different conversation that took place during that forum that may be taking place at in terms of the policing board or some other subcommittee that I'm not aware of. Do you know what I mean? Can you write to this committee and explain where the different aspects of that important piece of work and the dialogue across partners on the London Crime Reduction Board is taking place? Where do you think it's taking place, or is it not taking place because the demands and changes required don't require that anymore? That was of old. We now have got this. This is what's driving through performance issues and partnership working across London.
Of course, we can write to you about that, and we have talked about it before. Apologies, I do want to slightly pick up on what you said about the London Policing Board being very different to what Baroness Casey envisaged, because I think that Baroness Casey envisaged the London Policing Board being a significant step change in oversight and transparency and accountability in the Metropolitan Police, and I think that is the case. She envisaged it being able to challenge and drive through change and transformation in all aspects of her report, and the cultural aspect absolutely is there. That's why we have the People and Culture Committee. That's why during the neighbourhood policing paper, one of the key questions from one of the members was, you're talking about, this paper's about neighbourhood policing. Explain to us how this is going to change the culture of the Met as well. So I don't actually probably agree with you, I'm afraid, in terms of it being very different to envisaged.
I don't think we're in disagreement. Okay. I don't mind, but actually, when Casey was questioned here at this committee, she talked about 5 people driving through transformation and change and helping support the Metropolitan Police in delivering that, arising out of the issues that she found out about, but also building on the then crisis we were dealing with. So that's why I say it's different. I don't mind. I'm a fan of police committees and police boards, call them what you like. That's where I cut my teeth, really, in some ways. So I'm not there. What I want to focus is on delivery and about how we're focusing on that change and transformation and not being diverted off by the many crises and challenges the Metropolitan Police face. And are we focusing on getting performance right and the cultural changes right? And in amongst that, are we losing out through some of the changes we've made in terms of not getting right? So the London Crime and Partnership Board, which I want to elicit out, maybe will feature part of a future conversation, because somehow, if that conversation isn't taking place at the policing board, well, where is it taking place and who's dealing with it? And some of those, what I thought they were important issues, maybe they weren't important issues. I'm quite happy for you to say to me, no, Len, you got that completely wrong. It had run out of its time. It wasn't delivering anything in terms of effective policing for London.
Okay, thank you. One very, very quick question and quick answer, please. What reflections have the members of the London Policing Board shared with you about about the productivity of their board?
So clearly we've discussed that in terms of ensuring, and that's the conversation that we're having about making sure that we have a review of the board to look at exactly that, about what difference has it made, value for money, and also what impact it is having. Those are the conversations that we're having at the moment, and we are going to do a review like the Transport for London board does to make sure that the board is as effective as possible. And there's always lessons to be learned from any board, isn't there, about how you become more effective, how you can really drive and challenge. Can I just go back? Sorry, can I just go back to what you Assembly Member Deval?
Please.
The London Crime Reduction Board was, you're right in terms of clearly it's no longer in existence. I think a major part of the London Crime Reduction Board was about challenging the police, challenging the Metropolitan Police, getting reports from the Metropolitan Police, and in some ways it sort of morphed into a slightly oversight role, which wasn't what it was meant to be. That is where the London Policing Board has taken that over. There are many other places, not many, there are other places that those conversations and discussions take place. So, for example, papers on victims, papers on probation or the criminal justice system go to the London Criminal Justice Board that I now chair. So those, but I can obviously write to you about that.
Okay, can you tell us when the review will be completed and published?
We're just looking at setting that review in train, so I'll get back to you on when it will be completed, but it will be a quick review to begin with, and then we'll have to think about a more in-depth review after a couple of years of the London Policing Board.
Yeah, well, we're nearly at a year, as we pointed out, and almost a year ago you told this committee that, and I'm quoting, I would very much want to see an improvement in trust and confidence and an improvement in victim satisfaction. Is that right? Has there been?
We wanted to see, absolutely, we
no,
want to see that.
There's
been a stabilisation in trust and confidence, but there has not been an improvement in victim satisfaction yet.
No, that's right. Okay. So, thank you for that. We'll finish there. Now we'll go...
There was talk of KC2, some sort of report back a year later, which Duval reminded me quite rightly.
Okay. Well, we'll look at KC2.
We should get some indication of
of course, it was a manifesto commitment of Sadiq's manifesto commitment that he would deliver on that recommendation from Casey to have a 2-year review. It's 2 years in March from the publication, so we're not going to start the review now. The review will start in March because you've got to give the Metropolitan Police time.
Okay, we're now moving on to the Peel review. Anybody that's read it will be horrified, as I'm sure, Assistant Commissioner, you were, by it. And this links into what my colleagues have been saying. we are going to have to miss some of these sections because we've been talking about the other important things. So we'll bring them back to the next question and answer because they cannot be left. The findings of the peer review were so serious. But we haven't even had a response from the Metropolitan Police as to whether they will come to our next question and answer session, which is on the 23rd of October. Now, since you've answered our questions so beautifully today, and we're very grateful for that, can you commit to coming on the 23rd of October?
So, Chair, I can't now. I don't know what I'm doing on the 23rd of October. I will go back and work with our team to see what can be done. If I say yes and then I find out that I'm meant to be somewhere else, that would be disappointing. So I will go back to and speak to colleagues and see if I'm able to come on the 23rd of October.
Yes, please, because I think you've proved today the importance. You've explained why the police have done some of the things they've done that quells thoughts that have gone on social media. You've sat there and given an honest answer as to why you've done certain things. Whether we agree with that or not is separate, but it's giving your side of it. Now, the peer review is damning for the police. There must be two sides to it. But if the police don't come and answer our questions because they're too busy going to the London Policing Board, that is totally unacceptable. We have been selected elected to the Assembly by all sorts of people in our community from every possible angle. I mean, on politics, we disagree on lots, on other things we agree. We have been elected to come here to ask you questions, to ask the police questions. It therefore is absolutely vital that we get the police to come in and answer our questions on the 23rd of October. So if you could go back, because I know we're not going to get through all this, and try and grab somebody and make them come, we would be very grateful.
I understand the question and I will go back and see what I can do.
Very grateful, thank you. So we're now going over to Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I just want to commend your forthright in answering these questions and being involved in that report, because the police's side of the story is really important for the morale of your officers. So I just want to commend you again for actually being here. Look, the Peel report made for some pretty sticky reading. It was very uncomfortable. And I suppose the first basic question I want to ask is, do you accept all the findings of the report?
Lord Bailey, thank you. So look, the HMICFRS findings, while sobering, broadly align with our own internal assessment of the progress that we're making on reform. I think it's positive that most of the findings were raised by us in advance, as part of the strategic briefing process ahead of the inspection. So there was, in the main, there weren't things that we found in the report that we weren't expecting to see, which at least shows that we are alert to them. I'm also conscious, and I think it's worth noting, that His Majesty's Inspector Lee Freeman said the size and scale of the transformation being carried out is significant. This is well understood by the force, and it was evident in this inspection that many changes have already been made. And whilst many of their findings are causes for concern, they align with the analysis of the Met Management Board and where our investment should be focused and why reform is needed. And one of the Assembly Member Waymer mentioned earlier about our commitment to deliver the strongest ever neighbourhoods policing, our commitment to reinvest in public protection, some of which we have already done. I think in terms of the biggest concern for me coming out of that report was we agree that there's a serious challenge on some neighbourhood offences where I think a combination of some of the public order challenges and resourcing issues are affecting our ability to deal with volume of crime and volume of offenders in London. It's clear demand is up. Complexity per unit of demand is up significantly. Officer numbers are down as a result of recruitment challenges, and the budget is getting smaller. So those four things taken together point to some of the challenges that we're experiencing in terms of volume crime. But there is also some, and again, I don't in any way want to try and sugarcoat this, but it is important that we look at everything. And whilst, we understand that whilst our rates of burglary are lower than other big cities, which is positive, on robbery, theft, person and vehicle crime, we have serious challenges on the crime rate. whilst our outcomes are below what we would expect them to be in neighbourhood offences, the positive outcome rate for non-victim-based crimes, so the stuff we deal with proactively, is significantly above many other forces. And I think the other thing to draw out is the inspectors raised many similar issues earlier this year in February 2024 when they released their child exploitation inspection findings. And at the time, we acknowledged those issues and are setting in train measures to address them. So there's much to do. It is a sobering report. I'm pleased that that we are aware of it, and in our strategic briefing we were able to draw the inspectors to the key issues that we still think are challenging, and reiterate our commitment to deliver against them.
I think it's your response. That there's one silver lining in your response, that there's no feeling of hiding. You are trying to lay the issues you find on the table. I think that's a significant improvement from where the Met has been maybe in the past. Deputy Mayor, do you accept all the findings in the HMICFRS report?
Yes, of course I do. I mean, I think the inspectorate is an important part of the oversight of public, inspector of any public sector organisation is an incredibly important part of the oversight and understanding what's going on, but also looking for, whether there's value for money and the impact. It was a really difficult report, and Assistant Commissioner Matt Twist is very clear about that. It is really challenging, and it is a difficult report. The number, there's 2 inadequates and 5 requires improvements in that report. That's difficult. But what it does do is reinforce most of the findings of the Metropolitan Police already. Assistant Commissioner Matt Twist is absolutely right that they had flagged nearly everything that was in that report. But of course it's the inspectorate, and they've been in and really looked at all sorts of areas of the Metropolitan Police that we can't look at or haven't looked at, and it has flagged some other issues as well, and it's really important that those other issues, and I know that will be taken into consideration, and they're doing the assessment and the alignment around, is everything that's been picked up through this Peel report, is it in the new Met for London or not, and if it's not, what can be done about it? And that's really important, and that's part of the work that the Met have undertaken very quickly as part of the work around prioritisation as well. Because the inspectorate I think it's helpful. It gives you a route map, it gives you a very clear exposition of issues, and it gives a very clear reasons for it and what needs to happen. So it is helpful in that way to have the inspectorate to be able to do this type of in-depth report into the Metropolitan Police.
Is there any specific action that MOPAC is taking in response to this? Because I've been on this committee a while, you've obviously spoken to us at length, and one could be forgiven for thinking the Met was in a much better place, listening to you speak about all of the interaction that MOPAC has had with the Met, all the meetings and new boards and new actions you've set up. And if that was the only report someone had about the Met, they'd then be shocked to then read the Peel report.
I think, sorry, I'm going to get into trouble again with you. I don't recognise that as your description of what I say at committees or what I've been doing, as everything is fine and rosy in the Metropolitan Police. The Mayor made sure that the Casey report was commissioned. We have commissioned through MOPAC 2 independent reports through the inspectorate, one on the back of the Stephen Port, the terrible cases of the murders of Stephen Port, around investigation, in fact, which is part of this Peel report. And we have also commissioned the inspectorate around child sexual exploitation because we were not assured as to what was happening within the Metropolitan Police. So whilst we do undertake all the oversight, and I stand by the oversight, we still have been concerned about the level of improvement. So apologies, I'm waiting for you to come back at me around not recognising the way in which I talk about this.
I want to be very clear. You have on a regular occasions told us that you've set up many new systems. Those systems are working well, and if someone reads the Peel report, they would have to surmise that those systems are not working well, that progress has not been made. And that's the point I make. And that's why I asked a specific question, what next? What additional things will MOPAC
so
do?
In terms of the Peel inspection, the report, it was published on August the 15th. We genuinely don't get a full view of the report until 2 days, I think it is, before it is published. We clearly have conversations with the inspectorate about what might or might not be in it, but we don't see the report until then. And since then, we have been working with the Metropolitan Police around that piece of work that I talked about what is there in the Peel report that's flagged up as a problem and needs improvement or is inadequate, and is it in New Met for London, and that assessment, and that is the work that is ongoing between MOPAC and the Met and the conversations that we're having. That's a conversation I've had with the Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioner as to that prioritisation process.
So the answer is you are now looking for the things that the Peel report would highlight that may not be in that report because they have different levels of access to.
Yeah. Looking at what is in the Peel report compared to what is in the improvement and transformation plans through New Met for London, and do they adequately align? And is there enough, you know, for example, is there enough focus on investigations? Is there enough focus on the impact of neighbourhood policing? What is the Metropolitan Police going to be doing about what is in the Peel report around that? The strategic leadership and the strategic, the strategic drive and vision of the Metropolitan Police, and how is that being translated, and how is it actually impacting the front line? Is there enough in New Met for London for that? And therefore, what do we as an oversight body, and what does the London Policing Board do as well in ensuring that it can challenge and understand improvements and progress around that?
Okay, that's a reasonable action. You're not in trouble for that one, is that you do need. I just want to come to one quick question to the AC. Is there anything in particular in the report that all your experience in as being an actual police officer are particularly distressed about? What I was really distressed about is the lack of investigation, the low quality of investigations, because I think the biggest driver of crime is the idea that you'll get away with it. But the one silver lining was your better use of stop and search, which, despite the Mayor's position on stop and search historically, I think you've arrived at a place, certainly your boss has arrived at a place where it's been used because it's one of the most important tools in making our streets safe. So what's the bit that you're most happy about, but more importantly, what's the bit you're most distressed about?
Okay, I'll deal with the more important bit first. So I think for me it's the victims bit, actually.
Okay.
The bit around victims and what more we need to do to support victims, and that is very clearly in our plan. But there was stuff that was drawn out around our VCOP and other compliance that I think is really important that we grip and address. It is the New Met for London plan does recognise that serious reform is needed, and we've done quite a lot already. And again, the report is a moment in time, and all of the time we're trying to move it forward. Whether that's in terms of our V100 stack, identifying the highest harm suspects, whether that's in terms of our offender management and getting better at that, whether that's in terms of the additional resources we put into MASH and multi-agency safeguarding, and it's also where we are doing well. I think that's important too. But I think your point on investigations is also well made and right. I think it's fair to say that for a period of time, we've had a young and inexperienced workforce. It is not true to say that routinely sort of people dealing with complex exploitation are very young and junior in service, although when initially reported that can happen, which is why we're so committed to investing in public protection and have put extra leadership and extra officers into those areas to deal with things like sexual exploitation. In terms of the things I think I'm probably most pleased about, I mean, the HMI did recognise the significant improvement in how we respond to calls for service. They recognise the progress that we've taken in how we tackle violence against women and girls through the VORG 100, targeting the most harmful predators again. I mean, 76 of those subjects have been arrested for a total of 163 offences, and more broadly, we've increased our rape positive outcomes in this period by a further 441. So in the last 12 months, that's 780 charges for rape that we've achieved. I think the Inspectorate recognised the successful introduction of Right Care, Right Person, which is freeing up more time for frontline officers to do police work rather than other work. And they found, which I thought was particularly welcome, a workforce that's aware of what behaviours are unacceptable, and a workforce that will be confident in challenging them and reporting them. And thinking back to Casey, that probably wasn't the case with the officers that Baroness Casey spoke to during that period. And likewise, Lord Bailey, I mean, I think the Inspectorate recognised how we involve the community in the scrutiny of our stop and search, and recognised that as something that is positive and something that we all know is critically important as part of one of the many tools we have to combat the insidious nature of sort of gang crime and knife crime in particular in London. So those are the sort of things that I would pull out as the sort of positive things, but clearly nobody can read that and think there isn't more to do, and we know there's more to do. This is why New Met for London is so important to us.
Thank you for that, and your acknowledgement of some progress, but still far to go, I think is important. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your responses. I wanted to just ask a bit on data collection and the line in the appeal assessment around the Met needing to improve data to understand that powers are used fairly and proportionately. Obviously, one of the new Met plan for London priorities is to fix the foundations. So I just wonder what progress has been made to accurately collect data on people's ethnicity, given it's been over a year. Thanks.
So it is really important, isn't it? And how do you track sort of things like violence against women and girls if the sort of sex or gender data is missing, or if the self-defined ethnicity data is missing? It's something that we talk about regularly. It's something that, as recently as a few weeks ago, we were discussing through meetings linked to the implementation of Connect and meetings linked to how we can improve our data quality. There's an awful lot of work being done in terms of communication with officers, because I think in dealing with this, just telling, in a context where demand is ever greater and it's ever more complicated, just telling people that we need better data is really hard to land. Explaining to people why it's important so we can use that data and we can upload that into a data warehouse that will actually reduce the need for duplication, that will enable us to put on front-end applications that will enable us to better target intervention or better assess the risk of individual offenders, or actually the risks posed to individual victims, is critically important. Being able to talk about why it's important more than the sort of need to do it is something that we've sort of been speaking about a lot. So I think I agree with you. The data and the accurate recording of data is critical. I think some of it as well, when we sort of looked into it, it's very clear that officers are able and do record data, for example, linked to stop and search well in the main. Where the data is much weaker is in areas where it might be recorded through our telephone reporting or in the initial sort of recording of incidents, which then leads to challenges sort of later on. So I agree with you, data is critically important, and it is absolutely something that we're committed to improving on.
Thank you for that. And do you know when that will be, when you will get to a point where you can say that you've done as much as possible with the training element? I'd said this when we came to the session to meet the Commissioner. I was speaking to the person leading some of the transformation. I know how difficult it is from the NHS transformation that I've led in my previous roles. But I think, yeah, as you said, it's a big part of the culture of understanding the importance of it. And I just wondered, how much has been done on that?
So a lot, and we have a director within digital and data technology team who is, spends a good deal of her time focusing on this issue. I don't have a date here with me today as to when I think it's going to be fixed. It's definitely going to be an evolutionary process rather than something that we can fix overnight. But I'm happy to come back to you and sort of outline what the programme is and when we think we will get into a better place. We are seeing the numbers change already, particularly on sex recording. We are seeing the numbers improve significantly on that in terms of our entries onto Connect, and they are looking at ways. There's a balance, because you can, say for example on Connect, which is the system that brings together all of our previous sort of crime recording and intelligence, you can insert sort of mandatory fields, but every time you do that there's a trade-off, because I'm told, and I'm not an expert, but it makes the system sort of fractionally slower, and the more that you do that, the slower the thing goes for everybody. But we're working on that now to work out what, in terms of data entry, and what fields need to be mandatory and what fields can still be discretionary, and to allow the person to move on. So that's an important point.
Great, yeah, because I think this bit is definitely really important. And then just to pick up on something you said a minute ago about community engagement, What I hear from communities is that the people that often attend the community engagement structures set up by the Metropolitan Police are the people who are happy to speak to the Metropolitan Police and often may not have had a traumatic experience, or, you know, are part of a community that don't feel like they can engage. So I just wondered how you've considered that in community engagement, if you've got structures to make sure you're hearing from all parts of the community.
So I think the main thing that we're doing there is around delivering our strongest ever neighbourhood policing. Our route into communities is through neighbourhood officers. It's through local policing in local communities, being able to engage with the people that live in that place, and have that engagement. I think we all know some of the structures that have been in place for many years, whilst they have a purpose and they are valuable on one level, they may not fully represent all of the community, or in some cases the younger members of the community, who often will be those with whom we have the most interaction. And so in terms of structures, I'm not going to sort of give you detail now, but I absolutely can do. But I think the crux of it is in our strong desire and will and actual delivery in terms of bringing together the disparate neighbourhood functions and the neighbourhood teams into our more cohesive, ward-based and cluster-based operations to deliver the strongest ever neighbourhood policing. That's how we will engage better with communities.
Okay, thank you. I agree with you about neighbourhood policing, absolutely. What I am not happy about is that so many neighbourhood teams aren't based anywhere near the ward that they're actually policing. And that really has to be dealt with. And this committee has been asking for God knows how long for the estate strategy, because we've got to get those police officers based back near where they are. If not, they have to get buses. In Harrow, the Stanmore team are based in Hatch End, so I have to get a bus to where they're supposed to be. It's a real pity, because I completely agree with you. I'm a massive supporter of neighbourhood policing, but not when they're stationed miles away. I'll move on, because we're... but the estate strategy, when you're grabbing somebody by the neck to make sure they come to our next meeting, can you also whisper estate strategy in the Commissioner's ear, please? That would be well accepted. Thank you. So I'll get it in every meeting until we get this damn thing. Right, the next section is on the appeal on the investigating crime, which is marked as inadequate, and Assemblymember Duval's starting us off there.
Look, I recognised in an earlier response about where the MPS is making progress, but when you have elements around investigating crime and issues around, you know, the right person being allocated to the right crime being allocated to the right investigator, it does lead you to question and the supervisory roles of what is going on and why we still haven't got the consistency we require in this area. So this is where I'm going to a bit of tough love issues here. What is going on? Why is that there in the report? Is that a fair issue? I mean, you're on the back foot. Every time we have one of these reviews, it seems to me that the police take another knock. You take one step forward, 2 steps backwards, and that leads to trust and confidence issues around the basics, around what you're meant to be doing, investigating crime. So do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. No, thank you, Mr. Duval. I mean, I think the HMIC grading of inadequate for investigating crime is, particularly sort of concerning, because that's what the police should be about, right? That's what we do. That's our job. We do lots of other stuff, but when it comes down to it, one of our core responsibilities, and I've touched on these in the earlier section, is preventing and detecting crime. In terms of what we are doing, so there's a number of things in terms of how we allocate crimes to the right person, how we improve our supervision, how we ensure investigative opportunities, and then how we ensure we manage victims. And I can touch a bit on each of those. So, and again, some of this is a product of history in terms of how you get to a position where we are, but we're introducing new crime management units on BCUs. The first have gone live. We've now got 3 live, I believe. And the benefits of this will be a consistent approach to crime management, decision taken across the Met, allocations of crime aligned to skill and risk rather than simply by crime type, and providing a sort of local but final point of arbitration on supervision and governance. We've got a newly drafted crime allocation policy, which ensures the right crime reports are allocated to the most suitable crime investigator with the right skill set, taking into account the overall complexity of the case. This, in terms of supervision, I mean, all crimes that are reported to the Met are supervised, but clearly there's been some deficiency over time in how that is done. And we know the quality of supervision of investigations has a direct impact on the quality of the investigation, then the case file, which is something that the Deputy Mayor and I discuss in the London Criminal Justice Board, and ultimately the victim experience in their sort of criminal justice journey. So we've developed existing guidance. The importance of good supervision has been emphasised as part of our First Line Leaders programme. So every sergeant will have been sort of gone through this for us to sort of emphasise the importance of this. And also the addition of the MyMet service, which allows supervisors to monitor the performance of individual officers level via an app that victims can sort of complete, gives us some sense as to what's going on there. The investigative opportunities being taken, again, hugely important and sometimes hugely frustrating, and it's a confidence knock when you have reports of sort of crimes where there's obviously a line of inquiry and that the victim says, well, my phone was in this house and nobody did anything. That's deeply frustrating for all of us. So there's work to be done around how we're recognising those instances at the first point of asking, so within our contact centres. And also, as a trial, a new quality assurance process to dip sample cases on each BCU to make sure we're sort of spotting and taking easy opportunities, because it is evident and it's clear that with the volume we're dealing with, we can't detect everything. We've never been able to, but now more difficult choices have to be made because, as I touched on before, demand is up, the complexity per unit of demand is up, and the number of officers is going the other way. So in terms of criminal crime management, though, the end-to-end op model review begins this month and is looking to bring more efficiency and increase effectiveness, both in terms of the force control room, in terms of deploying and tasking deployment against trackable assets, so things like phones or bikes or air tags, and also volume crime team sort of using CID investigators with the College of Policing to advise how we may do better on that. And finally, we've already started a pilot around criminal justice case builders introduced in March 24, using dedicated case builders to help at the back end of this. So once we've done the investigation, to make sure that we can complete a file that meets the sort of Crown Prosecution Service requirements. And we've seen that where we've done this in 2 locations, so it's not widespread, and difficult choices will need to be made in terms of finance if we want to make it widespread, but we've seen the increase from 26% to 56% in terms of our first-time compliance. So it's something I'm really acutely aware of. It's something we absolutely know we need to do better at, and we have plans in place, as I've outlined, so to do.
So when do we think the complete rollout will occur? I mean, I'm not going to be shocked if you say some years, but it just seems to me that there needs to be a time frame of when that rest of that rollout is likely to happen across the BCUs.
So sitting here today, I don't know. I'm not going to give you a date, but I can absolutely come back with a date, and the team will do that.
Okay, if I can go to the Deputy Mayor now, in terms of what can the MPS do to reassure you that they are taking all the investigation opportunities that have been taken? I mean, it does raise some wider issues around screening out crimes and wider investigatory issues around making sure that our policies are up to date and we're not losing those opportunities to bring people to justice. So where's MOPAC in this, and what's your thinking about their relationship?
I suppose one of the important role that I play is to chair the London Criminal Justice Board, and part of that is looking at the Assistant Commissioner Matt Twist has already talked about the discussions and the oversight and the challenge there around case file quality, for example, and getting those investigations to prosecution. In terms of what can we do to assure ourselves and assess that, we will have to, as part of that work that Matt Twist has outlined, to look at what metrics they are using to assure themselves of progress and to be keeping a track of those and oversight of those. I have to say, in terms of, the Peel report, the investigation bit, it was really difficult to read because MOPAC has done a number of reports around investigation. The London Rape Review has, transformed into Operation Satira, which is about absolutely transforming investigation. There's been the VCOT compliance report. There's the quarterly reports that we have. So it was difficult because we haven't seen the progress that we would expect, even though we've done the oversight and done some real in-depth oversight as well. But in terms of going forward, it will be through the London Criminal Justice Board and the London Policing Board as well, in terms of through looking at New Met for London as well, as about how has this improved, what are your metrics and how are you evaluating the impact.
So it does beg the questions about, and you touched on it earlier about prioritising. What is, at some stage, not to answer now, but maybe in writing to the committee, how would you prioritise what would have the most impact on victims and crimes in terms of driving that down? How would you do it? We seem to have 1,000 flowers trying to bloom here. Do we need to actually, at some stage, focus on some key ones? No doubt you're going to tell me you are or what, but maybe you could share that with committee, because that would help us, I think, hone in on what we might need to focus over the years of this administration in terms of how we question or monitor progress.
So I think it's clear that where we have focused and where we have prioritised, we have achieved results. So we look at our investigation into rape and serious sexual assault, where we are the best of our most similar forces. We look at our violence figures, which we see, we're sort of, again, at the top end of our comparators in our other major cities. So it's clear that where we do focus, when we have focused on violence against women and girls and we have focused on violence as our priorities, we can see statistical shifts and we can actually perform very well. The challenge, as I set out at the start, is in the volume, is in the neighbourhood crime, is in the theft person, is in, burglary is going down, burglary is going the right way, but robbery, theft person, criminal damage, motor vehicle crime isn't. Whereas we are seeing good performance in terms of our violent crime and in terms of serious sexual offences. So that's not to say we absolutely must do more. And one of the things that we have looked at through the performance group that I chair is how we can look at the upper end of those theft person offences, particularly if they're linked to sort of more organised elements, particularly if they're linked to sort of high volume or recidivists that are committing sort of very significant numbers of crimes, as well as the number of suspects for that type of offence we have outstanding or wanted, either by the court or by us, in order to try and bring those numbers down. But I think what the message is that where we can focus on something, where we really prioritise it, and it isn't a short-term fix, it's prioritisation over many months and years, we can actually do it. But in the operating context I've set out, prioritising something means deprioritising something else, and that's the difficult challenge that we have.
Thank you. Assemblymember Garbutt.
Thank you for your responses. I've heard from people who've been arrested and who are under investigation that some of their belongings have been retained for an extended period of time while they wait for an outcome, and how big the impact is on them in terms of being able to carry out their work. Obviously, some of the communication has often been quite bad, and obviously there's a psychological impact of that hanging over you. So I know you've answered a number of questions on this to Assemblymember Duval, but I just wondered specifically if you could state that you're going to publish and implement a clear policy for allocating crime as listed in the Peel report.
So absolutely, I think the policy on crime allocation linked to the implementation of crime management units is very clear. I think, but your point goes goes precisely to some of the increasing complexity in terms of crimes that we would have investigated 10 or 15 or 20 years ago would have had no digital exhibits. Whereas now, almost every crime, be it volume or not, has some form of digital footprint, whether that is the mobile phone the suspect had in their possession when they were, I don't know, burgling the premises or committing the robbery, to the victim's phone they may have stolen, to a whole new tranche of crime based entirely online, whether that's online harassment, stalking, intimidation, fear, fraud, exploitation. All of these things are new, based in the sort of digital footprint, which means that our digital forensics function becomes ever more important. And to the point I think you're making is that it's taking too long. And that's because sometimes, and I don't disagree with that. And I think some of the work that we're doing now, and we've recently appointed a new director of forensics, and which sits within my business group, and one of the asks I have of them is how we can strategically in the coming years, whilst clearly maintaining our ability to deal with traditional forensics, our ability to deal with the high-end crimes through DNA and fingerprints, how we can shift our burden of investment and burden of focus into more digital forensics such that we're able to do those quicker. And there are some things we've already done in terms of implementing local kiosks where if it's a simple inquiry, some officers locally are trained in terms of how to plug the machine. I don't know the technicality, but in terms of plugging into a device that will do that for them, so it's much, much, much quicker. But in the more serious offending, I agree with you. It can take too long, and it can certainly take even longer if we don't have sort of access codes and other things to those devices. Thank you.
Do you have a timescale for that policy being implemented?
So the crime allocation policy is imminent, and the crime management units, some are already extant. So I think we have 3 that are already up and running, and the crime management policy is very imminent.
Thank you. And then my next question is just quickly on victim support, which I know you mentioned as one of the key areas that needs improvement. I'm actually meeting the Victims Commissioner later today. But I just wondered how you will ensure that victims are managed in accordance with the Victims Code and just make sure that all officers are complying with the code?
Yeah, I think that's right. As I said to Lord Bailey, it's one of the things I'm most concerned about. The Met Victims Programme's invested about £100,000 in face-to-face and hybrid online training covering professional empathy, trauma awareness, the Victims Code. The My Met service functionality I'm really optimistic about enables us to allow victims to rate the experience that they've had at the time of asking. I think it's going to be much more powerful in generating sort of satisfaction and other data than other methods if we can get enough people to use it and we can get a big enough sample. I think the Victims Programme's also looking at 5 new victims forums representing and capturing feedback from Black Londoners linked to violence against women and girls, victims with disabilities, LGBT+, and the parents of victims who are under 18 years old, funded by MOPAC with an external facilitator assisting. And the Victims Focus Desk was successfully implemented in May of this year in line with our new Met for London commitment. So we are making progress with victims. I'm not going to say the progress is enough in terms of our VCOP compliance, in terms of keeping victims updated. That's something that the programme lead and I have been speaking about only this week in terms of how we're going to shift this, because the HMIC recommendation is that we need to shift this within 6 months, and I think it's really important we do that.
That's really interesting. And just quickly on the training, are officers self-selecting to be on that training, or are they encouraged to attend? Because obviously, with these things, the people who are already sympathetic to them tend to self-select to go on the training.
I think your assessment is right. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, thank you. We will leave the last questioning section, colleagues, on antisocial behaviour and bring that back to the next meeting. So this is the last section, but we will finish at 1 o'clock. This is on managing offenders and suspects, which, as you know, Peel regarded as inadequate. So if I can ask you, Assistant Commissioner, what will the Met do to improve its ability to manage the risk posed by sex offenders?
Thank you, Chair. So, again, this is hugely concerning for us, but there are a number of things that we already have in train that's going to improve this. So as part of the new Met for London, we're uplifting our public protection teams by 465 officers and 100 staff. This includes 12 new leadership roles filled by Detective Chief Inspectors, 1 per BCU, enabling us to align all jigsaw teams looking after these offenders into public protection. In addition, we've invested in 12 new police staff posts to provide local points of contact for each borough to assist in the management of registered sex offenders and visor nominals. We also have local oversight, and we've mandated the alignment of our local borough OXA teams, that's online child sexual abuse and exploitation teams, locally, also with the centre, so they're much more sort of joined up so we can achieve a better outcome. One of the impacts we've had is a 40% reduction in the number of wanted missing sex offenders who are believed to be in the UK over the last 2 years. So that used to be 180 people that were wanted by us who were sex offenders, now down to 100. And noting that there are about 7,000 in the community, i.e. not in custody, but those that are there. We've also reviewed the jigsaw operating model and oversight. So in addition to the public protection uplift and the borough OXA teams, line management will now better support those teams. The OXA teams will become part of specialist crime but remain in situ locally delivering, but have that sort of professional centralised oversight to make sure that we're doing so consistently. And we've also improved access to the digital triage capability, and this links to what Assemblymember Garbutt mentioned. We have an enhanced digital triage offer whereby we've got forward deployed forensic technicians as part of the public protection uplift, invested 12 staff, digital forensic practitioners, 1 in each BCU, to deal specifically with OXA matters and to be able to expedite those things so we can react to risk more quickly.
Okay. The inspection highlighted a 60% no further action rate for indecent imagery of children offence types. You'll agree they're very serious crimes. So is there any specific reason we're not seeing more prosecutions?
So I'll have to write to you on that one. I don't know the detail as to why the 60% today is as high as it seems. I'm certain there are reasons, because in terms of our backlogs, in terms of dealing with online indecent images of children, we have brought those backlogs down significantly. We've also, and I think this was commented on in the report, been increasingly using schools officers where we have sort of two juveniles involved in some indecent images to avoid criminalisation of young people that are innocently involved in sort of behaviour that brings them to notice in that way. But also we need to be really clear, don't we, in terms of being relentless and ruthless in dealing with those predators who are exchanging indecent images of children not in that context. So I can update the committee separately as to where we think we've got to with the sort of 60%.
In October, when you come to our question and answer, that would be great. Thank you.
I note the revisiting of that point.
Okay, thank you. Assemblymember Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. And this is a yes or no, I suppose, is the answer to this question. As recommended by the HMICFRS, will the Met immediately review its operating model for jigsaw teams, and how will it ensure the teams operate consistently? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And consistency will be part of that operation, that review.
And I think that's exactly the point of bringing some of this back into specialist crime, so we can be consistent. Whilst we will be locally delivered, it will be centrally overseen.
And you may have answered the next question already. How will the oversight be performed on that? Are you suggesting that will be from a central point?
Yeah, I think that's right. So the review of the jigsaw operating model and oversight, it will be led. We've got a commander, Southworth, who leads for public protection on behalf of the Met, who will take on oversight of that function.
Thank you for that. What action will the Met take to improve access to digital triage capability? I think you've really answered that question, haven't you? Yeah. So let's not repeat ourselves.
Oh, deep joy. Well, we can now just very quickly ask the questions and give very, very short answers to the last one, which was preventing and deterring crime and antisocial behaviour and reducing vulnerability. Vulnerability. It's been a long morning. Does the Met have effective leadership training and performance management in place to optimise the opportunities NEC Connect provides, and why?
Yeah, so, I mean, if we touch on Connect, Connect is the new computer system that was deployed into service across 2 releases, one in November 2022 and one in February 2024. Drop 1, it replaced 8 legacy systems. So this is not an insignificant thing. In fact, it's one of the most significant digital systems improvements that I think has ever been done in policing, given the size and scale. So Drop 1 dealt with legacy case, custody and property. Drop 2 dealt with legacy intelligence, investigation, stop and search, premises search, search warrants and wanted offenders. The performance has been mixed since the start, but we knew no large-scale computer digital transformation would be easy. But we do now have a fully integrated solution that delivers in the whole life cycle of the investigation. The system does allow us to spot threat, harm and risk at an earlier opportunity and send notifications to safeguarding units. Case files can be completed from the offence details, so we don't need to duplicate, although again, that hasn't been without challenge, and we continue to need to manually monitor some of the transfer to the Crown Prosecution Service to ensure that issues are resolved on time. And also wanted offenders are now managed within Connect, allowing officers to circulate offenders in a more streamlined way. I think the custody, the proactive management plans and property have all worked really very well and enabled us to sort of make some real progress on that. The case files submissions have been where there's the greatest challenge. And also, I think, going back to earlier, some of our ability to search within Connect still requires some development, as well as the points the Assembly member made on data, which we need to continue. But if we think about what's been achieved, we have replaced 8 standalone legacy systems with legacy data with one system, linking information on the person, object, location and event to provide a richer intelligence picture and to reduce the risk of intelligence failure and to massively reduce the amount of double keying and duplication. We have better oversight of the work through improved management and visibility of workloads and tasks, and we do have an improving data quality, placing ever greater focus on data accuracy, something we touched on before. It isn't perfect. Officers are still getting used to it. And for some officers who may do a case file once or twice a year, it will still be clunky for a period of time. Yeah. But the actual system itself is operating, and it does give us some enormous opportunities for the future.
Yeah, it's not before time, is it? It was in a real state. There are other questions on that, which we'll come back to another time because I want to get through this. Assembly Member Best.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, how can MOPAC assist the Met in improving community attendance at ward panel meetings?
So there's a piece of work underway already between MOPAC and the Met around how do we improve engagement structures, which looks at safer neighbourhood boards as well as the community monitoring groups, and also thinking about the ward panels as well, around are they effective, who's coming to them, not just volume of people, but actually, going from what Zoe said, you know, actually are they the people that really do need to be engaging with the police, or are they the sort of the worried well in a sort of NHS speak? So that's a piece of work that's ongoing at the moment that we are undertaking with the Met.
Will that work include an evaluation of the context at the moment, or is it just looking forward? So, for example, will it be monitoring things like how many wards have actually had 4 meetings per year? How many wards actually have a ward forum set up?
I think in terms of the evaluation and monitoring of the structures and the processes, we will have to think about what is the most important things that we want to keep an eye, want to have oversight of. But I would expect the Metropolitan Police to be internally assuring themselves that their neighbourhood teams are undertaking those ward panels on a regular basis and have an understanding, not just, and these are the questions that I've asked the Met on a regular basis, not just how many people are attending, but actually who is attending, and are you reaching and engaging with communities that you really need to engage with.
And when do we expect that work to be something that we can look at here?
Well, the engagement review, I would hope, would be towards the end of, I think by December we should be able to have a look at what we're doing on that.
Okay, thank you. And to both of you now, the Inspectorate identified that the Met has no force-wide community engagement strategy. I don't know if this dovetails into your previous answer, Sophie, but how can the Met and MOPAC work together to address this?
Yeah, I mean, I can start, and I note the Inspectorate said we need to improve how we involve the community in local decision making, and I think it goes back to the point I made earlier about strongest ever neighbourhoods policing. Very early, we made the decision to invest in 32 neighbourhood superintendents, which have made, I think, a real difference in our ambition to create this strongest ever neighbourhood policing, aligning neighbourhood teams back to boroughs where they belong. As part of this, we're bringing together our ward teams, town centre teams, schools, youth, community support, ASB, licensing, engagement, special constables, volunteers and other BC support into one cohesive unit that's going to sort of be much less fragmented, and it'll be much easier to deliver to neighbourhood priorities working as part of that together. And that realignment will help us increase our consistent offer across London, which does need to be flexible to local needs and priorities. We've also maintained the momentum I think we started last summer when we launched a new Met for London with regular community events across 32 boroughs. And I think we touched on it looping back right to where we started here in terms of protest, in terms of the Israel-Gaza position. And this is a really good example where we set out our expectations very clearly of local policing teams to create meaningful and real community engagement that meets local needs. And since the 7th of October, local teams have visited thousands of vulnerable premises, organising drop-ins, attending community events, literally week in, week out for the last 11 months. Our central teams have supported that with weekly meetings of forums for community leaders from the Muslim and Jewish communities. And it's the same model that we've adopted within the recent disorder, with local and central approaches working together. I think it's been hugely effective, and also in terms of how the importance of community teams is reflected in our operational decision making. So, for example, when dealing with some of the events immediately after the 7th of October, we didn't abstract any officers from certain boroughs where they had the highest proportion of Jewish communities living, for example, Barnet or Hackney, where we were most concerned about anti-Semitic hate crimes. So we actually took a decision to resource the public order, but leave those officers locally such that they could do the important work we need to do. So I very much see part of community engagement as part of our overall operational response in dealing with some of these really challenging and complex issues.
Thank you. Apologies for erring there.
That's all right. Assemblymember Gobbett, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, and I know I picked up on some of the community engagement points earlier, but I just wanted to pick up on the fact that the report details that there's no crime prevention strategy, which I found quite surprising, and that few officers, so including in the neighbourhood policing teams, think that crime prevention is a key part of their role. And I just wondered your reflections on that, and whether, I think that prevention's better than cure, and obviously that if the Met was to focus on prevention, wouldn't that be better for Londoners?
So I think the historic point is it goes all the way back to the Pelian principles, and that the success or not of the police is judged by the absence of crime, not how we respond to it. And that sort of 200-year-old adage, I think, remains true. I think prevention, though, isn't something the police can do alone. I think it's very much in the partnership space. And at the time when the police tend to get involved, particularly in young people's lives, it's because they've fallen through other nets, and by the time in some ways we get involved, then actually it's not too late, but it's certainly other parts of the system have failed. in terms of sort of diverting those people away, those young people particularly, away from crime and the attractiveness of crime in for whatever reason. So I agree with the premise that prevention is really important. I think it's a wider partnership effort to deliver prevention, and it's something that we'll look at as a result of the report.
Thank you. Assembly Member Decide, you've got 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about abstractions, but can I just make the general point about community engagement? Since the Lord's Common recommended police community consultative groups went sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, there's been nothing at all in London, at that level. We have had IAGs, SNBs, but I think we do need to look at this borough-wide. There were statutory bodies. But anyway, my issue about, so I think we've got to look at that issue some other time in the future, Chair. But my question is abstraction, which is touched upon in the context of the Gaza marches. But just very generally, Peel found that abstraction makes up around 30% of neighbourhood policing teams' working time, meaning that officers have said that they aren't spending enough time in their communities. What is being done, very sort of generally speaking, to minimise abstractions?
So it's really important. We are increasing the use of officers that are not from BCUs. And I demonstrated that earlier in terms of the 4+2 thing, where we've got more officers that work predominantly 9 to 5 now, working weekends as part of their roster. We are making sure that officers that are not usually locally based have all of the kit and equipment they need such that they can be deployed. We're reviewing the amount of resources we're using on aid as part of this and where they come from. And we're sensitive to the needs of local communities at that time. And I just gave the illustration to Assembly Member Garbett around how we're sort of calibrating where we draw the resources on based on the issue that we're dealing with. But it's really clear, and it loops all the way back around to the start, both the chronic and acute demand of policing protest over the last 2 years. Those officers have to come from somewhere. And it becomes increasingly challenging in an organisation, and this goes back to sort of levels of funding we get for the capital city function, where the capital city functions are getting ever more demanding, and we are doing ever more of them in terms of both environmental protest linked to Israel Gaza, protest linked to individual events in other countries that resonate very loudly on the streets of London. There will continue to be abstractions, but to be clear, we are doing all we can to minimise those abstractions from neighbourhood teams, because I recognise and agree with the point that actually in solving some of these problems, or identifying and engaging with communities, in spotting the polarisation, in dealing with the division, neighbourhood policing is critically important in that. So we want to minimise the abstraction insofar as we can.
Chair, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we come in on time. Thank you, Assembly Member Desai. Right, I would like to thank our guests for attending this morning and for their answers to our questions. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Can I ask the committee to note the monthly report from MOPAC? And can we also delegate authority to me as chairman, in consultation with party group lead members, to agree any output arising from the meeting? Agreed. Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note its definitely not work programme? Noted, thank you. The next meeting of the committee is scheduled to take place on the 9th of October at 10 a.m. in the Chamber, City Hall. And the next question and answer session that we would love to see the police at is on the 23rd of October at 10 a.m. in the Chamber, City Hall. I have no other urgent business, so that concludes today's meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.